Okay. Good morning. Welcome to the Orange County Alliance for Community Health Research Workshop Series. I am Jacqueline Tran, and I'm with the OCACHR, as well as the Orange County Asian Pacific Islander Community Alliance, OCACHR. And welcome here to the UCI campus. I want to take just a quick minute to debrief on the exercise, and then we can get started. But I have to say that this is the fastest group to ever sit down. When I said, oh, we have a whole minute left, everyone's like, okay, I'm done. And I thought that was very interesting. I had a couple of comments. One was, are we supposed to like this? Which I said, I don't know. I also heard that we were the most obedient group, totally following rules, and then that it was a little eerie to walk into the room and you're not sure if you're in the right place or not. Any other thoughts, comments? A couple of people said I cheated, or they're really good lip readers, or lip speakers.
I mean, it's a little faster. It doesn't take long to do that because people did not have a chance to talk. So that's why when you get to talk, you're gonna keep going. So this is the fastest game we can play.
All right.
It was hard because I always had to say nice to meet you, but then I was like, oh.
Okay.
But I knew it was.
Someone else said they whispered, right? A lot of folks seem to have a really hard time not speaking, which I thought was great. Any other? What's that?
There was bowing. Did you feel like you wanted to say something? Hello.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think I retained much information because I think when you connect with person, it doesn't matter how many people you meet. I think if I was meeting just one or two people, but getting really good information and connected to them, I would have retained that for the future. So I just don't know anybody, even though I went through everyone.
Okay, that's a great comment.
I said not know because I knew a lot of them from other
Right. And
workshops.
Yeah, no, that's a great comment. And that is ironic since we're on a university campus where we read an awful lot of information. So that kind of cues into some of the discussion we'll have today. Any other thoughts, comments?
I noticed that some of us were holding it, and some of us were passing the card to each other, and I wasn't sure what to do, so I met the person, and sometimes when I assumed that he wanted a tray, and I would put my hand forward to grab the card, they would grab my hand and shake it. So I got that.
Yeah, no, that's great. Any other thoughts or comments?
I just saw so much more information on everyone's cars, and I was thinking, gosh, what they thought of mine.
Okay.
I just followed the direction.
Yep.
Minimal information.
Yeah, and some folks went back and added information after they met a few people. They wanted to inform them more, which is a great thing. Yeah, so there's no right or wrong answer, and we will actually continue this dialogue a little bit later, but for an observer, I actually thought there was actually eerie in quietness, but there was a lot of positive energy, lots and lots of smiles, lots of waving as a greeting, lots of, like Mo said, bowing, just different body language, but people were also very open. People approached each other, people didn't kind of act standoffish, right? And people who didn't have a partner actually sought out someone to speak to. And you didn't want to stand alone with just a card. So maybe the words were missing, but for an observer, there were some other things that were going on that we may not have been aware of, but that I also thought were very positive in lieu of the use of words. But I think the comment about reading the cards is really great, but I didn't retain any of who I met is actually a key point that we'll keep discussing later today. So thank you for engaging in that. So you're here for the Building Successful Partnerships workshop. And as I mentioned, it's part of a series of workshops from the Orange County Alliance for Community Health Research. This is the third in the series. And if you are a return participant, thank you so much for continuing on this journey with us. I wanted to highlight the space that we're in. We're here on the UCI campus, as you're well aware, and we're here in the University Club, which, as you can see, is a beautiful space. It was established in 1967 and is actually a very busy hub for the university in terms of community gatherings and events. And if you didn't know, you can also have a wedding and a wedding reception here. So it's a wonderful resource. I also wanted to highlight that UCI is one of the 10 UC campuses in California. And I didn't know this, but it's Orange County's second largest employer. And we've also had 3 Nobel Prize winners from the university. So that's super exciting and something to be very proud about. And if you all didn't know, the first law school cohort will be graduating this spring, 2012, a couple of buildings over from UCI. So if you've been here and seen UCI grow over the years, it has really become one of the premier UC campuses with an MBA program, a law school, public health, pharmaceuticals. It really is a great resource for our community. And so I know we're meeting here in this space with each other, but I really hope that you do see UCI as a larger resource in terms of faculty and researchers, and as we talk about community engaged research, that we can help build some of those bridges with the resources, the rich resources that are here on the campus. This is an overview for some of you. As I mentioned, this is a series of workshops, and really the goal of the workshops is to increase opportunities for community and academics to partner in health research here in Orange County. And the goal is really to build community academic participatory and participatory action research. And the goal of the group workshops is to skills build, to network, and then also provide opportunities for technical assistance and support. And as part of the participants of this workshop series, there is support from individuals like myself, as well as faculty mentors from both of the academic partners that are part of this partnership, to help you either strengthen your own organization's program evaluation or even look at opportunities to partner for future funding opportunities. Again, the Alliance who is supporting this opportunity. These are the partner agencies here in Orange County. The Alliance was established in 2011 as a collaborative partnership, and the goal is to really bring bench to bedside sooner, faster, and better for our communities. And we are housed here at UCI under the Institute for Clinical and Translational Sciences, which is one of 60 programs across the country. And we really hope that these workshops are helping to engage the conversations around community engaged research and how do we create a healthier community here in Orange County. So this is the training objectives and outline for today. We're going to focus not only on the opportunities to build successful partnerships, but also some of the challenges of working in partnerships. We're going to talk a lot about communication. We're going to discuss some suggestions for protocols or procedures in terms of structure and decision-making that may help to foster successful partnerships. We also provided some resources for you for those types of protocols and policies in your packet. And then we're also going to get a great treat later in the morning in terms of hearing from those who are engaged in community and academic partnerships at various stages in the partnerships, and hear from them what the strengths and challenges in working in partnerships are. Okay, and then of course, hopefully we'll network in a way that helps you better retain the information about who's in the room. So I'm going to get you up and out of your seats already. We're going to do another group activity, and I'm going to start by having you number off from 1 to 6, and then you're going to get together at a table with your group. Okay, so Amal, you're 1. So how does everyone feel? Like, I think relieved you can talk, for one. Everyone's like, oh my God, can I talk now? So this was my favorite look all morning. So if you could describe the game in one word, what would it be? Confusing. Frustrating. Fun, okay. Felt like learning a new job every time I went to a different table. How about non-observers? Non-participants, sorry. Some folks trickled in a little bit late who just were watching you all.
The facial expressions were funny. You know, some people looked really frustrated.
Yeah, there was some angst in some folks. Yeah, yeah. What did you guys expect at the beginning of the game?
Better instructions.
Better instructions, okay. Order. Yeah, I can share that on some of the instructions folks numbered things because they felt they were not in order or in an order that worked for them.
More communication.
More communication?
And verbally.
And verbally.
Consistency.
Consistency. Did it help that you did have some time at the beginning to read instructions together and talk?
Yeah, for that first round. But then once one person goes, then everything's just out the door. So.
Right. And at what point did you realize that something might be different?
When someone new joined us, new partnership coming up, it's hard to face with us, same challenging.
Right?
Because they might have a different idea when they join a different table. And then when they come to our table, they might even think differently. So it's like the conflicts of like understanding.
Right. So.
It's okay, because you get a public written apology. Everybody.
Yeah. So I have to say you guys got resourceful really quick and started using whatever equipment was around you, which I thought about banning, but it was actually very interesting because people were like, you know. So there was some strong feelings behind the written word. And how did you deal with it when you realized there might be something different? I'm going to pick on Vitana a little bit because he said when the new person came in, they had a different idea. Okay, so then if you were a new person, what did you do?
When I came to the next table, I was like, oh, the ace is high. She was like, no.
Yeah.
I was like, what? And then I was like, oh, okay, well, let's just go with that then. I just kind of went with it.
Okay, some folks definitely did. Some folks observed for a little bit before. They're like, I don't know what these people are doing, but all right, following the rules. Okay.
Because I moved 2 tables, and the first table, it was sort of sat back and went, okay, the way they did it was completely different. So I was like, oh, it's okay, I'll just go with it. Let them tell me. But then when I went to the second table, they started doing it the same way we were doing it at the beginning. So I was like, oh wait, okay, I remember the rule again. So then that's when I was like, no, it's this way. So then,
My people.
but yeah, the different tables was like one you just sort of sat back because I had both and it was like sat back and like just sort of let it go and then moved again and it was like, oh wait, it's similar. Okay, wait, these are the same rules that we started with.
Right.
So it was sort of once you're sitting back and you're just letting it sort of play out, and the other one you sort of get more engaged into it. So.
Right. So of the folks who said it was fun, how did it feel like? Clearly a little different than some other people who didn't think it was so fun.
I think it was just funny because when we were writing notes down, we're like, or we were like, let's just start over.
Right. So let me ask, when you wrote notes, did it help or did it confuse more?
It confused me more because I was like, ace is low, and they're like, no, ace is high. And ace trumps all, and I'm like, oh my gosh, okay.
But how did you feel? Did you feel like,
Confused.
okay, confused? Did you feel outnumbered a little bit?
Yeah, so
Intimidated?
along with everyone.
Right, okay. Teresa, you had your hand up? No. Julianne?
It's fun to see who was taking initiative in the game. Like, no, you're doing it wrong. I'm doing it right. I'm like, okay.
All right. Any other thoughts? So folks didn't like that you didn't get to talk, but you guys were quite creative and started writing very fast, big worded notes. Some of you were like, no, hearts, you know. Was that, you know, emphatically, right? Hey, pay attention. This is what I'm trying to tell you, right? And some folks, a lot of movement, a lot of facial expressions. Some folks just sat back and said, whatever you want to do is fine with me. I don't know, Laura, if you have any other comments as an observer, or you guys came, you know, you're like, what the heck is going on here?
Lots of laughing, which is good.
Okay, okay. And then are there ways that this could have been improved besides talking, you think? Order, someone said, right? Rules.
I think when a new person gets to the table, there's a discussion about that table particularly, what the agenda is at that table. So every time you moved and every time a new person came, it was getting everyone up to speed on the same pace and on the same page. So
Right.
it would probably be a little bit easier.
But did you have time to do that?
I think you would be able to just have someone go really quick, some designate it, and say, this table is ace high, diamonds this, real quick, or just have like a guideline written out on the table that at this table, okay, this is this, this is this, and this, and it's out for everyone to see, and then everyone can use the same thing. So like
Okay. Okay, Chandra had her hand up.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, just kind of like they do bridge. You can bring your little card, this is how I play, this is what this means.
Okay.
Maybe more like an amount of time that everyone plays and then everyone trades together.
because people were moving tables like mid-hand and just sitting there, and you know, one person we dealt in, and then like 2 more people sat down, and we were like, do we deal with more people?
Right. Teresa, you had your hand up?
I was just gonna say that it was interesting when I moved to the new table. I just kind of talked to whoever was next to me, or not talk to, but wrote down notes. And then when the third person, or the other person came from the other team came over, I started talking to them. So we just kind of had side conversations while everything else was going on, and then we all kind of came on the same page.
Right.
I don't know about other people, but I didn't figure out that there were different instructions until I actually got back to my seat.
Oh.
So I didn't know, you know, there are different things going on. So once you don't know, how you can really prevent it.
Right. But what was it that cued you when you got back to your seat that there were different instructions?
Well, when she said that, you know, ace is low, and we all said no, ace is high, then we came here and said, you know, well, what's going on? And then my friend told me that, you know, it seems like there were different instructions. So we kind of like, you know, figured it out at the very end. So
Right. Ernesta?
to know that, you know, you don't know something is going on.
It would be interesting to find out when individuals were still at the table, the new people that came in. It would be interesting to find out if the new people take charge when they came to the new table, or was it the people who was at the table was in charge? That would be interesting to find out the dynamic, that who was in control of the table if you were still there, or those who moved to the table. It would be interesting to find out.
Right? Yeah. Batana?
I think there should be a person who is in charge of the coordination of the whole table instead of everyone throw out all the ideas. There should be an agreement and a person who can coordinate all the partnerships. Hey, this is the procedure protocol you have to follow, and only that person talk instead of the whole table talk. You can choose the person who just joined the table.
Okay. In the back?
Like I came late and I was trying to wait and see what was going on to see if I could integrate, but I noticed that it was too late, so I waited until the next activity somehow.
Amel?
For me, the whole ace high, ace low, whatever. So I was trying to stand up for someone else who I thought should have won.
You got stared down?
Argued, and I'm like, wait a minute. So that's when I really realized not just I thought the difference was 5 minutes versus 5 rounds, but then I realized no, it's more than that. The actual instructions are completely different too. So I'll stand up for that person, but that table was not going to let me stand up.
So you felt intimidated by your group?
Go with the flow, which I usually don't do, but when you can't talk, it's hard to like.
But that's interesting you said that, right? That's not what you usually would do, but put in a position where you were a little bit outnumbered.
Yeah, I think it wasn't outnumbered, it was that I couldn't speak.
That you couldn't speak, okay. Because some people spoke very loudly with their words. Teresa, you had your hand up. Julianne?
I thought it was funny, so at our table we had 3 losers, and for losers you have to play rock, paper, scissors. I'm like, how is rock, paper, scissors going to work out 3 ways? You know, and I couldn't say anything because,
You're like, whatever. Okay, so this is fabulous. And think about then all the things you've shared with me and how that may apply to partnerships. Right? So there were lots of assumptions. We all got instructions, and they were in English. I did not trick you in that sense. But even people at the same table read the instructions very differently, right? I would say that 80% of the rules were the same, and then the high card, if there was a high card or a low card, was different, and then which direction to go. And if you remember, we numbered off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't know how you decided which way was up or down or the next table. And some people were shunned away from tables. Oh, yes. People walked up to a table and they weren't welcomed in. So they went to another table. They still were not welcomed in. At some other tables, so it was really interesting, right? And again, there were no right or wrong rules in terms of what was a winner or a loser per se. But if you think about it, the instructions were in English. I think you're all pretty proficient in English. You had a chance to talk about your interpretation of the instructions. And you even had a chance to try out your instructions. Chandra, go ahead.
So the trump card was consistent throughout?
No. So ace was high at some tables. So all the cards, there were no face cards, right? But ace was high at some, ace was low at others, and then trump cards were different at various tables. So at some tables, the heart, right, was trump everything, and in other it was spades, okay? But those are some pretty key minutia that change the dynamics of the game, right? And at first, like you said, some new people jumped right in and said, whatever, you're wrong, these are my rules. And some new people said, and it depended on the size of the table, too. Some tables were pretty big, and some people actually didn't even have a space to sit down when they walked up to a table. So they kind of observed, and then took a little time before they decided if I want to sit down or not. Weren't sure if I want to join the group, right? And I want to go back to Vitana's comment about, could someone, even without words, take in charge and help to coordinate the group? Like at some point, people started pointing out suit cards, right, to help people understand, no, this is trump, or this is high. There's some very emphatic, communication going on, right? And rules change. Does that ever happen in your job? For me, it's daily these days, especially working with the federal government, like daily, like yesterday, 2 days ago daily. Rules change. We don't all necessarily have all the information, and we don't always have all the information. We can choose to play. We can choose to wait until the next round if there's a next round, right? There are lots of different things that were going on there. So I think it's amazing how hard it is for this group not to talk, which is a wonderful thing. But even if we did talk, right, I think Vitana's point was, well, someone should coordinate. Does that mean that with words things necessarily become clearer, or does that also cloud? And how do you use your choice of words to communicate with folks, right? So some people chose very emphatically to draw bigger signs. Bigger signs means this is really important. Some folks chose to explain with as much possible detail as they could fit on that card so that someone else could have as much information as possible. But each one of you functions differently. Right? I think the first example was perfect. It was nice to read everyone's card, but I retained absolutely nothing. So I feel very bad about that networking opportunity for you, so I'll make up for it. But, so some of us are auditory learners. I'm a very auditory person, and even webinar recordings don't work for me. If I am in the space and I can hear, I retain what I've learned a lot longer and a lot faster. Some folks are very visual. Right? They need some sort of image, something to associate with for them to retain the information. So it might be a voice, but it might be a face. Like reading is nice, but I read a lot of words all the time, whether I'm going to remember that or not. And then some folks are really kinesthetic, right? Doers. And then some of us, as we grow and age, also become a little bit of all of that. Right? Some maybe more than others, but we may need a little bit of all of those things. It's kind of like the quote where they say, if you teach a man to fish, right, versus just giving him a fish, he will feed the village forever. But if you just give him a fish once, how will he know to go find the fish next time? Or where the river is if you didn't help him find it, right? So remember, this was in English, and we had rules and instructions. We even had a chance to chat and talk about that, and yet we still struggled a lot with how to communicate and negotiate how to move forward with change. But change happens all the time. And wouldn't it be a surprise if a funder gave you some guidelines that you didn't necessarily fit right into? Does that mean you just don't play? Right? So thanks for entertaining me. You guys have been such a wonderful group this morning. In a very good way, really. Yeah.
You think that, the person is not bound into certain rules, okay? So how would they really, the outsider would think of that this person is breaking rules? Because it was very difficult for me not to talk.
Right.
So I did talk.
Right. So I was going to ask that. People were bold enough not to break the rules, but what if someone did? And how do people decide it was okay to start writing notes? Did you see other people writing notes? Or what compelled you to say, well, I'm going to become very resourceful, and I might not have my voice right now, but I do have a way to communicate with you with my words. I'm going to ask the folks who started writing to share how they felt that I'm not breaking the rules because Jackie's watching, but I am helping to facilitate more information flow, right? Anyone want to be brave enough to share? I'm not calling you out that you broke a rule, but we don't always have all the resources, right? So we don't always have a voice. We may not always have $1 million, and I can tell you I can spend $1 million pretty quickly, right? But we still have to make do. So why did folks start writing notes? Were there no rules about it? Was that why it was okay I didn't say you could or you couldn't? Okay, there's some nodding. Yay, nay? It's like a trick question. Go ahead.
At my table, everyone kept saying that I was the winner, and I was like, no, I'm not the winner. And so I was like, no, ace is low, and they're like, no, ace is high. And I was like, I was so confused, and I just gave in to what they were saying. But I was like, I'm not the winner.
And you felt you weren't because the rules had said,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And even though they all said, go, good luck, take us to the next level, you were like, no thanks. Okay, and that's actually important too. I mean, you know, folks have talked about a new person coming into the table, and I shared with you, not everyone was welcomed, right? They followed the rules, but they weren't invited in, right? And then some people were supposed to leave and didn't want to leave. They're like, I don't know what's out there, right?
We were talking about communication, and I think that even though the rules said that we weren't supposed to talk, I think that, you know, it shows us how essential it is for us to communicate with each other. And that even if there's a rule that we can't use our mouth, that we, you know, I mean, everybody, every table, because that I observed and that I participated in, we all found ways around it.
Right.
You know, we all found ways to communicate and to try and, you know, we would not know what to do if we could not have found a way to try and create some sort of sense of cooperation or, you know.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't acknowledge this, but laughter was kind of a cue that it was okay, right? And when someone disagreed and they couldn't speak, some people were, you know, like, that's mine, or I won. Yeah.
You know, there's like a lot of this kind of stuff going on. And
right, but you guys all created a norm, right? And then when it wasn't a norm or someone disagreed, there was emphatic communication to let you know that. And everyone kind of was like, oh, wait.
When we were kids, it was nice that someone came to us and told us on what they were doing. So we came again. So she kind of gave us an idea of what's going on. So that was nice that she get up on her table and at least let us know what's going on.
Right. That's always very helpful, yeah. It's kind of like the first activity. A lot of folks said it was a little eerie walking in with nobody talking, but people moving around, right? But again, it's sometimes we walk into a different space. Sometimes we walk into a different community. And maybe I have a PhD and all the skills training in the world, but I don't know all of the nuances within this group. And it might be the building next door. It doesn't have to be 3,000 miles away, right? Or it might be the CBO down the street, serving the same exact population, in fact. But if we don't communicate and talk, there can be a lot of differences and assumptions and rules that we play by. And I like how much people want rules. It's amazing. It's great. And then I bet you there are people in this room who are like, no more rules. The less rules, the better. Like, one rule is do what you need to do, right? I don't want a sheet with 10, 20 things. But it's very interesting. Actually, that's perfect for later. Chandra, go ahead.
I felt like my notepad became kind of like my recording of my understanding of the situation. The first time I was asking the table, you know, are diamonds Trump? And I wrote it down and got my answer. And then by the time I went to the next table, I knew to ask what's Trump, so I wrote that down.
Right.
And then I started taking notes as I was watching the game.
Right. So you became more informed, more information to make a better decision, right? That's what a lot of you do for your clients, right? It's not telling someone what's right or wrong, but giving them more resources to make a better informed choice, right? Sometimes you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, and is no winning choice, but you still have to make a choice, right? But the more information you have may help you make a better choice. Any other thoughts, comments? You guys are so quiet again. So I want to thank you. I hope you don't feel that I put you in too uncomfortable a space, but a lot of today, and it's nothing you don't know, that I wanted to talk about was really about communication. And not by cutting off your tongues was that the best way to show that, but I also wanted you to remember how important that communication is with your body language. You had tones, even if you didn't have a voice in that last exercise. And then, you know, things like how closed off we can be, right? How open we are. I'd remind you in the first activity, everyone was tasked with meeting new people, very open, approaching people, welcoming. And then in the second one, you were so concentrated on a task and activity, you kind of forgot some of that. Some of you did. Right? And so sometimes we get very tunneled in what we do, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but we don't then get to see all the things around us. And that may influence and affect the work that you're doing or the opportunity to build partnerships because you might miss somebody while you're going down that pathway, right? Any other comments, thoughts? I really want to thank everyone for being so participatory. Go ahead, Batana.
One of the things that I noticed about the power difference, especially those who newly join, they are still afraid of being intimidated by the one who is a dealer. So they have the power, not like this, or you have to sit down, or you have this, your role is your. It's something similar to the funder that said that you have the project plan, whatever you have to do, build partnership and stuff, and they said that I want you to do this way. You have to move your focus suddenly to a different direction, and that makes the whole project, the whole plan change, and also affects the whole result, the outcome at the end.
Right, definitely. Any other thoughts, comments? Yeah. I do want to ask, folks who were dealers, did you feel more empowered with control of the group, or did you feel, well, if I'm tasked with doing something, people may not look at me for instruction because I'm already doing something, facilitating something, but not necessarily having to tell people right and wrong? Ernesta?
I didn't feel necessarily empowered. I just felt like I was just doing my part. I feel like I was just being the team, that I'll take this role. So I didn't feel like I was in the leadership role. I was just doing my part. I'll do this part. I felt comfortable in doing this part.
Right. But that's important because you felt I'm contributing, right? Right. If you weren't a dealer, did you feel like I didn't have as much control maybe? Maybe, maybe not. Don't care.
I think in your original group, I think everyone was in the same partnership, but when you moved, and you weren't dealer or you weren't part of that, then you did feel a little on the outsider side because you weren't really involved. But in the original table, I think we all had our own parts, and we all felt that we were all contributing to the same
Right.
thing. But when you moved, that's when you started feeling, whoa, wait,
Right.
you're not really sure where you fit in, you just sort of play the role and then you move on.
Right. So did you feel maybe that with your original group you had trust and understanding, but then when you approached a new group, you're like not sure what's going on yet?
Well, yeah, because I was one of the people who had to walk to the table, and I was like, okay, never mind, I'll walk all the way.
But what was it about that table? Was it people weren't looking at you, or?
They all stared at me because they were in the middle of it, and I was like, okay, never mind.
Right.
Right.
Conflict, yes.
They were like, come here, and I'm like, okay.
Okay, because we don't have competing timelines ever, right? We all have due dates on the same day. Mine is always the most important due date, and you over there, that never happens, right? We're not caught in the middle of things sometimes, right? Okay, go ahead.
I think one thing that really kept me going is that I kept saying to myself, oh, this is just a game. It would have been nice if we could do that outside, and just thinking that, oh, you know what, it is just, okay, call it a game. I don't know what, it's not going to be a game, but, just attaching it to, oh, this is just a fun thing. And it doesn't really matter who wins, it's just, there's a point and we get to it later. I keep telling myself that so I could keep going, but I don't know when it comes to community,
Yes, he's like, really?
Trying to convince her.
Yeah, he was like, really? You're not going to help me? But how does that coordinator get decided? Is it automatically?
The process. There should be a process.
There should be a process, okay. Is it majority votes? Loudest person in the room? I joke about that a lot, that in community settings there are some great advocates and vocal folks, but the loudest voice isn't always the right voice, right? So.
I think sometimes it's just identifying people's strengths. Like this one woman I work with is so good at figuring out processes, and I'm not at all. And so I love that she kind of takes charge of those, of you know, process making and some of that work, because it's,
right.
That's one of her big strengths. So.
Right, so it's important to identify individual and community assets and strengths and work on that, right? Having rules might help with decision making, right? Order, right? Okay, that is often an area with a lot of challenge, and it can be whether there are power differentials or money differentials that sometimes really complicate whether or not decisions can be made. I was just speaking to someone yesterday about sometimes decisions have to be made in a split second, and you don't have the opportunity to have a democratic vote. So do you go ahead and make that decision, or do you maybe lose out on the opportunity because you respect the process and feel that you need to ask everybody? So I work on a lot of collaboratives and coalitions, and I am the biggest proponent of acting and doing what we say, but I will tell you that many days democracy is not a good thing. It is challenging to actually really get everyone's voice, and silence is not necessarily no, although sometimes I do clarify that silence will be understood as a no, but silence isn't necessarily a no, right? In some cultures it's disagreement with, many cultures is disagreement with what you said. We do proxy votes by email. Just because you didn't respond didn't mean you didn't care. You just didn't get to that 500 email after you were on travel all last week and, you know, still catching up on whatever it is you need to do, right? And so a decision-making process is also really important. Quantifying maybe a time frame in which we have to hear from you. Otherwise, we will make an assumption, which may not be good, that you're not responding for A, B, C reason, and maybe be clear about that. Right? But I need to vocalize that, my words, or put that on paper so that we have a common understanding about that, right? Otherwise, assuming that I function the same way a doctor's office does, that if you don't show up, you're a no-show, well, I may be 2 minutes late, but I want that appointment, might be very problematic, right? And you may lose a lot of trust and respect that isn't easily gained. Conflict. So I'm one to say that conflict is a good thing, because I think it brings out some really great conversations and hard questions that actually make us stronger. But to actually breach that conversation can be very difficult, right? And I'm the first to say it's okay to disagree, but I'm also the first to tell you that sometimes it takes a lot for me to be okay with disagreeing with someone, right? And what does it mean to disagree? You know, there's consensus by 80% rule, which doesn't mean that 80% of the room votes for it, but that you can be 80% behind something, right? You're not going to be 100%, but if you're at least at 80, you're saying, we're going to support this. And there may be an unknown, or I'm not sure, but I'm going to, with good intentions, support what's going to happen, right? But how do we breach conversations about conflict? Do we just sweep it under the rug and hope it goes away and doesn't come back again? Because some of us in our organizations do that. And sometimes it's okay, but sometimes it comes back and bites us in the butt. There are resources nowadays that come in and do conflict resolution, so neutral parties that come up to help facilitate dialogue so that the folks involved have a neutral space to have discussion, and Jackie might have power and be the boss and say, what's the problem here? You know, why don't you like me? Well, that's not very neutral ground for someone to share what's going on, right? So conflict resolution is actually really important, and the way that the group wants to address that might be very important to think about. And around budget, that might be a really huge, huge issue. Or expertise. So maybe an NIH grant says that unless you have a PhD, there is no way you're going to be a principal investigator. That's a reality. Do we negotiate that? Or do we just say, well, Jackie's got the PhD, so automatically she's the right researcher for this project? Maybe I'm in the room, but I'm not the right researcher. Right? So those are really important things to consider. So communication, we've talked about it a lot, right? The goal is to deliver a message, right? Simple enough. There's a sender, there's a receiver, and there's a message. But is what is sent always what is received, right? Or is what is said actually what is heard, right? And that's really key. So there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of different things in between the delivery of the message and the receipt of the message. There's your physical environment. Maybe I can't hear you. That is always very problematic if I'm not speaking clearly and loudly enough for you to hear me. That's a simple barrier, but it happens, right? Have you ever been on conference calls where you're like, I'll just tune out, don't hear anybody, muffle, but I don't want to disturb anybody, so I'll just multitask on my computer. The assumptions we come with, right? The information that we come with is not necessarily the same information as the person we're speaking to has, right? So how do we communicate that information? And then the expectations. So like we've been talking about, we come with good intentions and good hopes, but maybe along the way that changes. Maybe along the way I've done something that causes you to question my words. And so even though I'm careful and thoughtful with my words and my tone, it doesn't have the same meaning to you because I've done something that has caused you not to trust those words when I say them anymore, right? So as simple as that is, every piece of this link is actually very, very important. Time constraints, culture, identity, environment, and experience, it all contributes to how we convey and communicate. And everyone today kept telling me over and over, I have to talk. And it's so natural for us, but there actually is a lot of thought into communicating with your words. Have you guys ever played telephone? So some folks shook their heads and said no. So it would be as if I started a conversation on this side and I asked that to be passed across to you and then finding out if what you hear is what I said. Yeah, and we're actually gonna maybe do that in a little bit so we can find out how that works. So communication, while it sounds so mundane, is such a pivotal part of relationship building and partnerships. And partnerships are relationships. They're relationships between people, they're relationships between organizations, and the communities that we represent, right? So it really is important to have the dialogue. So we've covered a lot of this. What makes communication difficult? So even though we were using language, the same language in Barnga, we had a very difficult time understanding each other, right? So proficiency, maybe if you were Barnga experts, that would have been a breeze. You would have been like, I've done this before. I know how to rotate. I'll tell you which way to go, right? Literacy, right? I think I'm pretty fluent in English as a first language, but and I work in healthcare. If you throw a user's manual to someone, there's a lot of language that you have to look up. And I will challenge you by saying that legalese, is a whole different language as well. I understand the law, I can read propositions, I can read legislation, but if you gave, Laura can speak to that, an actual, case with all of the legalese in there, I would be Googling every other word and trying to understand not just the definition, but then how does that actually apply, right? So even though we're all speaking English, there's a lot of complexity in the language. Communication styles. This room is filled with talkers, which is very exciting. But there was a lot of nonverbal communication today that was also very powerful, very, very powerful. And so not to forget that, right? Appropriate topics. We just talked about power and decision-making around budgets. In some communities, that's not an appropriate topic to start the dinner table discussion with. And in surveys, we talk about this a lot in the work that we do. A lot of times we want demographics up front. Question 3 should not be about anybody's income. I just met you, I have no idea who you are, I don't know what family you come from, and you wanna know how much my family makes? I know it's anonymous, but I don't really care. But maybe if you put it at question, maybe not 56, that's a lot of questions, I will actually be very honest with you about what that is, and I will actually tell you all of my family's business by question 50. But income at question number 3 with the communities we work with is not a very good place to put that, even though lots of surveys have shown that that's an appropriate place for demographic information, right? We talked about conflicts, styles of dealing with conflicts. I'm a head-on, like you should see me and my partner Dave. It infuriates me when I'm angry and he's done talking. And the worst is when I'm talking and he goes, are you done? Those are fighting words, right? I may be so done, but I have something more to say because he asked that question, right? So different ways of dealing with conflict. different ways, right? And then we talked from the very beginning, different styles of learning, auditory, visual, kinesthetic, and maybe some of all of that in between. And then we talked an awful lot about assumptions and expectations. So just a reminder again that all the links in the communication chain is very important. And there are studies that have been done that actually say that word choice, go ahead.
Can I add one more thing to that?
Sure.
I'm not sure if it's the right place. But I think most of us in this room communicate very easily and frequently by email.
Yes.
And sometimes that's the expectation of how we send messages to each other.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes there are generational and cultural differences in modes of communication, and people prefer phone calls
Yes.
or face-to-face meetings.
Yes.
So I think we more or less need to be aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
And also emails, some people don't read them.
Yes.
They keep it short. So
Yeah.
there's so many cultural ways of communicating across professions, racial, ethnic groups. Like, it always helps to just ask,
Right.
how do you prefer for me to stay in touch with you?
Most definitely. Yeah.
And not make the assumption that email, because all of us basically use email, is the better way to go.
Right. So I want to thank Heng for sharing that, and I actually do bring that up later, that maybe participation expectations should be communicated in that manner. Is email the best mode? Is face-to-face? Do conference calls suffice? You know, some projects work across the country, and face-to-face is not. But I will tell you that in most projects that I've worked with that are, there is at least a one-time, once a year face-to-face, because there is still so much value and richness in that process. So I think it is important, and I don't think any of us should make the assumption that it's just a racial ethnic thing or a generational thing, that email is not a friend to everybody. And in email, a lot is also gained, but a lot is also lost in communication. Sometimes you have to bold your words to be emphatic, right? The tone, you lose tone in emails, and that's actually really important. So I appreciate pointing that out. And I was just going to reference that studies have been done where they say, you know, we talked a lot about word choice, and I imagine that all of you have done presentations and you spent tedious hours picking out what you're going to say on your slides. 8% of the meaning of a message. That's not to discourage you to keep working well on your slides, but think about that, right? Tone of voice, which I just said we lose a little bit in email, 28% of the meaning of the message. So I could yell at you, but if I'm really sincere, you might not be as mad at me, right? I know someone who's really good at that, really good at that. I'm like, wow, okay, I can't do that. And then body language is 64% of the meaning of a message. So if I spend the rest of today talking to you like this, many of you probably will not think much of me when you leave. You might not already, but it wouldn't help my cause to spend the rest of the day talking to you like this, right? So there's so many pieces to communication. Heng just pointed out, we communicate with ease, we speak very eloquently, we write very expediently, but there's so much that cues into the meaning behind your words. So just a little reminder. And the most important thing is checking in to see that, you know, what you're saying is actually what's being heard. You know, just because I think I was clear doesn't mean that I was clear. And that's why asking questions is important. Asking for clarity is important. If you don't, you know, if you don't ask, sometimes it's like you don't care, right? You didn't care enough to then inquire and get more information as to what's going on or why, right? So we're going to do a little active listening exercise. So just grab a partner next to you. Someone's going to have to decide who's the first person. And within these 90 seconds, you're going to talk about a favorite place, a high point this week, maybe some feelings about work, something that you're comfortable sharing. And the second person cannot speak until the 90 seconds is up, okay? And when the 90 seconds is up, the second person must paraphrase and restate what the first person said in the hopes that you got the message that they were sending, and then you'll swap, okay? So what motivates you, right? What drives you to do the work? But that's part of assumptions, right? Like, you all come here with an open heart and an open mind, hoping Jackie has good intentions, that she's doing this for some reason. Maybe I'm not. We'll have to wait 2 more hours to find that out, right? But with good intentions, right? And, you know, I was going to bring this up later. I think when we enter into all partnerships, we assume good intentions. But even though we assume that, good intentions alone aren't going to get you to the finish line, right? And then what is the finish line? You know, for you, it was like at some point she's going to say stop, and I can be like, okay, this is over, right? But you're right. In serving community, however you define that, there may not be a finish line. And when we say health and well-being might be the goal, what you define as health and well-being may not be what Amal defines as health and well-being for her community. And those assumptions, when you come to the table, you know, I've been telling you weeks on end, let's partner, let's be friends, let's work together. But I don't know for sure that you all have the same goals. I don't know that you all have the same desired outcomes. And because you're in the room, I'm hoping with good intentions that that's what we want together, whether it's a racial ethnic community, a geographic community, right? But those are assumptions before I come to the table to know why we're here. And some people may be like, I don't even know what she's doing up there, right? So those are all really important things to think about, not just today, but like you said, in the real world, when maybe you don't get reminded of these different assumptions that we have, but how do we keep applying that to the work that we do and the people that come to the table? And sometimes the new person isn't new in terms of not being a partner organization. They just might be a new staff person, but they may have 20 years of experience, but they're new to the table today, right?
We had a back and forth about whether we should be holding on to our sticks and carrying them, or whether, you know, we should put them all back at the end of each round. And you know, the other person was saying, well, how do we know who's the overall winner at the end of it? And I was like, what if you keep all your sticks, then the table will run out.
Ah,
so,
thank you for sharing that.
No one knew whether there was a final outcome, if you were going to at the end say, the winner is.
Right, I actually was going to, but I appreciate you sharing that, right? So we come to the table and we all took what was mine, and then we left, but was there anything left at the table? Does that ever happen in the work we do? Right, gotta hold on to what I need to make sure my project's successful. But maybe Annette's didn't have any, but I got what I needed. But I am here with good intentions, right? And I'm not making a mockery of that, but you know, like I said, good intentions alone aren't always going to be clear as to why we're here at the table, right? So you guys have taken me through all my slides already, practically. So I kind of use Jen's comment as a segue to talk about trust. Right, and there's been a lot of research about CBPR and partnerships and what works and what doesn't. And some key areas, and we're starting with problem solving today, challenges in building participatory relationships is trust, right? We also talked about power differences, we talked about decision making, and then conflict and conflict resolution. And trust is thrown around a lot, you know? It's kind of like respect. We actually have a lot of admiration for both words, but what's the tangible piece of trust? You know, if you were to come here today and ask me, how do I build trust with Laura Riley because she's here, you know, how does that happen, right? And I'll be guilty of having written articles and read articles that say trust is key, but then what is trust? Is it a word scribbled on a piece of paper in really big letters, all caps? Is it knowing that we all play by the same rules, and so I trust that you will hold me accountable to those rules? Or is it trusting that when you walk into any group, wherever you are, with good intentions, that people will help guide you, right? And when we work in communities, whether it's, again, racial, ethnic, academic, geographic, we don't know what has happened in the past that might have been transgressions to these communities. Right, some of you were a part of the first training where we talked about the Havasupai Indians, right? If we talk about historical injustices, most of you have heard of Tuskegee, right? And I don't know how you feel, but would you be comfortable to walk into an African American community and say, that was a really long time ago, you should get over it? Oh, okay, just checking, right? So just because it happened, quote, it's not that long ago actually, a long time ago, and it didn't happen yesterday, doesn't mean it doesn't still have importance and value in that community. So I'm coming to the table, I'm gonna be a researcher with good intentions, but if I walk in and I just said what I did about Tuskegee, I don't think one of you would work with me. It would I was educated enough to know about Tuskegee, right? But the choice of words I just had really devalued the respect you would have for me as a researcher, right? That, however, doesn't mean I don't have the capacity to learn how to better do that next time. But that's a reality, right? It doesn't mean we don't have the resources to Google. I love Google and Wikipedia. But because I can read the information doesn't necessarily mean I know what to do with that information, right? So when we build partnerships and we walk into the CBO that needs our help, or the community academic researcher who needs our community, we're making a lot of assumptions about what we know about what's going on now, let alone what has gone on in the past, that leads us to believe in or trust in the opportunity to work together, right? And I, full of heart, believe that we all come with good intentions, but people, have had difficult experiences or exposures, and so just because you have good intentions doesn't mean I should play in the sandbox with you, right? You might steal my toy later, but you had good intentions, you wanted a play buddy. So in this workshop series, we've talked a lot about research, right? And I'm the first to say that I love the search for knowledge. And the search for knowledge is important, but for what purposes, right? And we keep pushing CBPR, not because it's the best thing since sliced bread, but because CBPR and CBPAR is really about the search for knowledge to create social change, right? We want to do needs assessments to understand why the Chamorro community isn't accessing screening services. If you're going to tell me they're not educated enough to understand there's a hospital down the street, that's kind of a misnomer, right? But what is going on? And maybe there have been past experiences that prevent them from wanting to approach the public health hospital down the street. I may be a family member of someone who was killed in the Khmer Rouge. And so when you tell me to trust government, I might not feel the same way you do about the American government, right? So it's not to say that you have to go do research on every single body and figure out what that history is so that you know everything about everyone. But you gotta walk into the room and be open-minded enough to understand how that may influence what we're doing. And we're funded by NIH, and I will say that NIH has come a very long way in understanding that when you work with community, it's not asking them after you get the grant funds to go recruit people to get surveyed and then to walk away and not tell them what you did with that survey data, right? And it's not for lack of good intentions, but there have been, past methodologies that seem to work well that help to ensure the significance and the validity of the data. But as you work more and more with people and cultures, you find that that validity is not just in a tube or in a controlled setting. And as you said, in the real world, you can't control what's gonna come down the street next, even if you've got a stoplight on the corner. But the stoplight will help make sure that when they come down the street next, it's not at 60 miles per hour, right? So research, I'm here to tell you I'm a proponent of that, but not every community is gonna find value in research, right? And even though I'm encouraging CBPA and CBPR as a method to help ensure that research isn't just about taking information and then walking away, people might still not feel that's the most important thing. If I don't have clean water to give to my kids, filling out a survey about clean water may not be my priority, right? And so how do we have conversations about then, if it is a priority and we want to actually help serve, how do we make that more salient? I don't actually have all the answers to that, but I think that's part of building trust, right? The other piece that I think is really important with trust is the congruency of your words with your action, right? So you can come in with a PhD, which is a well-earned degree, and have lots of nice things to say, but if then what you do thereafter is not so flowery like your presentation when you came that day, and you don't keep coming back to the community, then what does that tell me about whether I should trust you or not? The next time you come around and say, there's this great research, it's really gonna benefit your community, you haven't been studied before, but we really wanna make you a priority, but that's the one time I show up and I don't come back again. And I wanna say that this is not an attack on PhDs, I'm just using them as an example. But the same is true of a community partner who comes to the table and says, we've got all these needs and we want to work with you. And then when you reach out to work with us, well, I'm too busy to talk to you right now, right? So the congruency and the consistency, someone had said that with the activity, is actually really important. And I will challenge you in actually doing that every day in your work, within your own organization, with the colleagues that you have, as well as outside of your organization. I find that to be the biggest challenge, that the words, if I speak them, are delivered like I promised them. Otherwise, all the money in the world can't buy back that trust and respect, right? Power differences. So we may not all have experienced discrimination, or we may not have identified it as that, but that might be something that folks have experienced. It might be something that may influence whether or not they trust and want to participate with us. I put this quote that I've heard a lot from community members, that the community doesn't care what you know until they know how much you care, right? And then they're vested in being your partner for life, whether there's money or no money. And how that happens, sometimes it happens overnight, and sometimes it takes years of commitment to build. And I put the MPH and the PhD up there because my colleague in San Diego, who works with the Samoan and Pacific Islander community, has spent many, many years sweeping church floors, opening up buildings so the youth can come play in order to build trust in his community. And he has found that partnering with academic institutions has been very valuable to bringing resources and information into his community, as well as then bringing that information out to others so they can understand the community that he lives in and works in. And he was like, you know, people keep coming to the church and talking, and they have all these initials after their names, and people are like, what does that mean? And so most of you know that an MPH is Master's in Public Health, and you know what a PhD is. But folks in the community had been volunteering with him for as long as he's been doing this, for over 20 years. And they didn't necessarily have an MPH or a PhD, but they certainly did have it in some senses in terms of the life commitment they'd made to serving their community. And so, not to make fun of the degrees and the titles and how hard it is to earn them, they started tagging it on in a funny way to support and honor the people who were serving their communities. And so in his community, an MPH is my people's helper. And I know the spelling is wrong on the next one, PhDs, but people who deliver. Right? And I love that. I got an MPH, and I hope I'm somebody's people's helper. That's how I hope my degree is helping to serve the community. And I think that all folks who do have degrees really do have that intention. And I like that everyone said, "Aw," so I'm in the right crowd. Like I said, we're not mocking the degrees, you know, but for the same value, the people who have lived 20 years and been serving the communities also bring expertise and value to the table. And that is really important. And so maybe I don't have a PhD behind my name, but you know, I think I might know a little bit about the community I come from. I may not have graduated high school, but having worked with all these researchers and faculty for the last 20 years, I might have a little knowledge and experience. And so making assumptions, again, might get us in a little bit of trouble, right? This is a tough one, the budget. And you know, maybe it's not culturally appropriate to talk about the budget, but in a partnership, there needs to be some transparency, right? And maybe if you're the one holding the purse strings, if you will, you might have more control than you think you do. You might not think it that way, but you actually might have control. And so it might be important to have a discussion about, is a partnership truly 50-50? If it's not, is there transparency so that there's agreement across the board on how much is allocated to different things? This is a really tricky one these days with federal grants, but culturally, food is a very important part of who we are and how we gather. It's not an allowable fund right now, but are there ways that we can look at finding resources to provide for that? Otherwise, you just can't come in and say, I want to talk to you and I want to take 3 hours of your time and we're not going to provide you even water, right? If you talk to some of our community partners, you may want to go in for a 30-minute survey. But if you approach the house of an elder Native Hawaiian, you had hoped that you will be coming inside, chatting and asking about the family, having a little bite to eat, hopefully getting in your 30-minute interview, and then staying for dinner. And then getting an invitation, you know, for not just yourself, but your family to come to the luau next week to meet the other elders who you're going to want to interview. Right? And maybe we budgeted only 10 hours for Jackie to go do that, but she just spent 10 hours on her first and only interview, right? Now, I challenge you to say it's not a valid interview, right? And to get the other 49, she needed to spend that 10 hours on that first one. Because if she didn't, she'd still be searching for the next 49. But now, she's at the luau on Saturday, and she finished all 49. Right? So there's some truth to thinking about that. And it's not just cultural, it's really kind of community. The way that we function is just like in academia or doctor's offices. How many of you truly respect the time you have with your doctor, and after 15 minutes, you can't ask any more questions? I know I come with a list. I do not waste my 15 minutes. I come with a list because I know that if we've gotten to the point where it's nice to see you, Jackie, we'll see you next year, I missed the boat. And if I really want their valued time, and I didn't have that on my list, I have to wait 12 more months to ask my question. I won't, but you might, right? And so within different organizations and agencies, there is a protocol, there is a culture in the way we work. There's reasons for some of it, but understanding that and maximizing how that will benefit your partnership is actually very important, right? So we talked about a lack of respect for the expertise of all. So definitely we honor and value the academic partners and their degrees. We also honor and value life experience. Bless you. The School of Life is a very good teacher, and there's a lot of richness in that. Sometimes folks who have power don't think they have power, right? And they're not trying to impose, but you behave and respond in a way that gives them power over you. Right? I'm still a student, and so my faculty have a lot of power. I work with some of them, and here in the community, it would be Hang and Chris, but in school, it would be Dr. Tanis and Dr. Foam. And I wear those hats also culturally, right? In my community, I didn't grow up calling my friend's parents Judy. I called her Mrs. Nikelski, even though she told me for 20 years to call her Judy. And so there's also that, right, in the roles that you have. I'm a little bit older now, but I still see myself as one of the younger people in the community. But I've had positions where I've had a little bit more hierarchy in the organization, and I've got moved up on the ladder, but I felt culturally inappropriate. I worked in a Vietnamese clinic, and everyone was calling me. I'm like, I am the youngest person here and have no business being called that. But because we were in a workspace, folks were calling me that because I was their boss. Right? I didn't feel that way, but that's how they treated me, right? And maybe sometimes we aren't aware of that, but becoming aware is actually very important in whether or not we will have a successful relationship, right? And then the role of leaders. We talked a lot about titles, the MPH, the doctors, the nurses. There's a lot of reverence for folks with education, and rightfully so. You know, in different communities, it may be an elder. Like I said, if you don't get permission from the elder to enter the community, you can ask for as many services as you want, you're not getting any. In another community, it may be very matriarchal. Right? If you want access to the community, the family, you've got to talk to the female leadership. In a congregation, you might need to talk to the minister. Right? We've done a lot of work with faith-based organizations. For us, we've done work in breast and cervical health. But we need permission from the male pastors and ministers, and then we get access to their wives, who then help have us reach the 600 congregants that they have. But we couldn't just walk in and just say, I have an MPH and a PhD, and I'm here to help your community, and so I'm just going to come on Sunday, and everyone's going to talk to me out there about their breasts and their cervix. Right? Sometimes there is permission that is needed, and sometimes the time to ask that is not the appropriate time, but you need to still honor and respect that and recognize it. And oftentimes, even if you make mistakes, the fact that you do recognize it goes a really long way. So any thoughts, questions, Yolanda?
I was going to make a comment that a lot of times, well, I shouldn't say a lot of times, but sometimes some researchers come into a community, a very humble community, and they come with this arrogance that you poor people, I'm going to help you poor, dumb, uneducated, you know, illiterate people. And when they come with that attitude, even if they never verbalize it, it's that they are masters at conveying their feelings, or I don't know, but people pick up on it right away, and they will not be, it would not be conducive to the research, because you're not going to have a very receptive population.
Right.
To research on, because
Right.
already they've already blocked you off.
Right, yeah, and I think that's true. I will say that all of us come with best intentions, right? And we do want to help. But how we convey that we want to help is very different, and it can be very condescending. And like I said with my colleague, if he were to go tell his boss that he had to go sweep the floor at the church, his boss would, that's not your job. But he came back and said, if I don't do this, there's no way we're getting in that organization. You know, and if that's who we want to work with, we're going to have to understand what their organizational culture is and how respect works there. And one of our community partners is, you know, be careful because you got to volunteer first to prove. You want to know how much you care before we know how much you know, right? Because we can always help you learn more and do the things we need you to do, but we can't teach you always how to care and have compassion for people. You can, but that's a litmus test for a lot of communities. So it's really important how you come in and approach the community and even the choice of words, like you said, right?
So you mentioned something about being a volunteer. Is it something you recommend that we learn about the culture? Because there are tons of cultures out there. And if you want to reach out to people, how do you really, I mean, going on Google is something, but you know, that is not the same as you really understanding how to get to, how to buy them what you want them to get out of this, you know, partnership. So what would you recommend as learning about a culture before you do something wrong and then try to, you know, fix it?
Right. I think that volunteering or being at community events and coming to the community and being in the community is very helpful. I know that volunteering can be very time limiting, but it's not a commitment of 1,000 hours before they give you the OK card. You know, it is how sincere you are when you show up to these events as well. And I think for anybody, even as an organization, that's my biggest pet peeve, like to expect everyone to come to OCACHR or the Alliance. You've got to be kidding. Right? I think we're kind of centrally located, but the reality, centrally located to whom? To me, because you know, I drive to work there every day, so it's easy. But for some people, we just talked about this yesterday, it took 3 buses to get there for 5 minutes of my time. So sometimes it is important to go out in the community and be in the community, to identify community leaders. And leaders often aren't the people with the titles necessarily. Right? They're people who are doers often, and they have a real pulse on what's going on in the community, and they can help you understand. And it's okay to ask the silly questions. Is it appropriate to dress this way? Is it appropriate to bring food? Is it, you know, and some of those things aren't always in your control, but asking and trying to understand and recognizing what those things are really important, right? Like if you were to work with the Thai community and show up in shorts and a t-shirt, good luck. You've already disrespected the culture and the belief system. But you are the brightest person in the world, right? So, but if you could ask someone you know, is there something I should consider, right? It's not necessarily cultural garb, it's actually just what they wear, that's their clothes, it's not an outfit. That might be very meaningful and important to whether or not you may disrespect somebody.
I just wanted to sort of add to that, I think trust sort of goes to the organization that you work with too sometimes. So not just building trust in the community that you work with or the communities, but also building trust with the organization so that they know that, like the example you gave of, you know, spending 10 hours for an interview, that's actually time well spent. And
right.
That, you know, sort of that accountability, that there's trust in your assessment of what work needs to be done as well. It can be a hard balance.
Right, so I think that's a perfect example too of working with groups that do have relationships with the communities you're serving, whether they're racial, ethnic, or whatnot, has a lot of value in terms of validation and reputation and trust building, right?
And a lot of times we go in, we have a future agenda, but we have to be in the moment with the group that people can listen. I think that's such an important thing, is to not have your thinking and what all the things you got to get done, but to be in that moment with that community and to start listening, and that begins the trust. And you can learn a lot in just being present.
Right, yeah, definitely an open heart and an open mind definitely helps a lot.
I think it's key, what you said before, that if you just go in there once, do your paperwork and leave, that's not going to fly either. But what you said, that they have to see that you're genuinely a caring and interested person, and that you have, like you said, everybody has a good intention, but you have to be able to convey that.
Right, definitely. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about decision making in the game that you played, by the way, was called Barnga, if you ever want to look it up. It actually is used to kind of illuminate the complexity of culture. And that different cultures come with different backgrounds and different knowledge and information. And when a different person comes into the mix, what happens? So it's a great interactive activity if you're interested. But decision making. So Vatana said, it would have been great if we had a coordinator who kind of told us what to do and how to do it, and that would have helped a lot. Right? But how do you decide who that coordinator is? Is it automatically Jackie because she's standing in the front of the room? Because he did ask me, can you help with instructions? And I walked away from him. I did. I was like, I smiled though. I said no, but I smiled and I shook my head and I walked away. And he was not happy with me.
And then they walked back.
All right. I feel very guilty for cutting you short. This room is definitely talkers. That there's a different buzz and energy in here. Are you guys good listeners? Speed date, yes, yes. I'm going to use that right now. Stop. Stop. Let's wrap it up. I know. Okay. Was there anything comfortable or uncomfortable about the situation? A lot warmer feeling and a buzz than not talking earlier, right?
Yeah, I feel so comfortable when I listen, and the listener listen to what I have said, and then until the end, he asked me a question and repeat it back. You feel much better and acknowledge when people repeat back the message to you, say that they care about you, they listen to you. That is the most important.
Okay, great.
For us, we started out with the 90-second thing, and then it just turned into a conversation. And we kind of broke the rules, but.
But you didn't feel so bad breaking the rules, did you? Because it was getting to know someone. Yeah.
I was generally interested, so I just asked questions as she was telling me because I wanted more information. And she was, I know, we broke the rules.
No, but I love what Teresa said. I genuinely was interested in getting to know the person. And then Vatana pointed out something really important. It was nice to be heard. You ever get cut off? I cut people off all the time. Do you ever, my mom and I having a conversation is a funny little endeavor. Cutting people off, like not intentionally, but you get so excited about what they're saying, you want to jump in, but being heard is actually really important. Being acknowledged, right? Go ahead.
But I think sometimes verbally you can acknowledge and actively listen to them by asking a question that.
So engaging,
to engage
yeah.
in it, rather than just, because then you can actively listen better. I think,
Right.
Continue and actually remember what they're talking about, because
Right.
otherwise, if you just don't talk or, participate in some way or another in the conversation or ask some question, then after a while you can just
90 seconds is a long time. Some of you are like, what do I say next? But a lot of you also used your body. Folks talked with their hands when they were excited about things. There were smiles. You engaged. People moved in to hear. Right, so you actually used a lot of your nonverbal communication skills as well. There's a hand back there.
Yeah. And the thing I was mentioning is that sometimes you forget to listen. You have so many thoughts and things going on in your mind or things that need to be done that you really forget to listen to what the other person is telling you. Let them finish their complete thoughts before you already are interrupting what they're saying.
Right.
I think in terms of listening, it's very important as well to listen to the other side.
Yeah. So I would agree that a voice is a powerful thing, and we all are here to empower voices for our communities. But listening, and it is a skill, is actually very important. Are any of you parents? You guys have great listening skills, right? You also know how to hone into what you don't need to hear too, right? That's a skill. There's a hand in the back.
I'm not a parent, but
That's okay.
I really think that usually people keep thoughts to themselves because they're so scared of how people would perceive what they're thinking. But you know that someone's a really good listener is when you tell someone something and they give you excellent feedback where you feel that, hey, I talked to myself, but this time I got clarity. Because when you talk to yourself, there's no affirmation, there's no sense of, hey, what you're thinking is good. Yeah, I feel you.
That's great. Awesome. The last two hands, go ahead.
When you were talking about tone, I was thinking about talking with my 2-year-old. Tone can get you a long way with okay, we need to take a bath now, or, oh, would you like to
take a bath?
Yes, 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 definitely. My future mother-in-law says that I have a total different pitch when I talk to the nieces and nephews, and when I want something from them is very different. It definitely is. Comment in the back.
I was just wanting to say that, it seems like that was the first chance we had to talk all day, so it was kind of hard to, stop. But I also noticed that in this activity, there was no conflict. So once there is a conflict, and you are so bound to say your side, your point of view, and this individual is keep going and going and going, you know what you're supposed to do. They don't give you a chance. And then number two is that, there is a conflict. We want to get on it, and then there's no chance of talking about it. So at some point and then there's authority also.
Right.
So where do you draw the line?
Right, yeah. So that was a great point, right? She actually said, well, there was no conflict, right? So I want to remind everybody in this room, and I will hold you accountable, I'll pop up on your shoulder when you don't even know it, that when you have conflict or disagreement, that if you can help vocalize it, it might actually help clear the air. But that sometimes if you pent some of that up and you hold that against that other person, they don't even know it, you may be unintentionally destroying that relationship and not giving them an opportunity. And I'll be the first to say, if I don't know I'm doing it, I don't know how to fix it. Right? Hank, go ahead.
I think the basic rules of discussion and engagement are the same when there is conflict.
Yep.
That before you start engaging, make sure that both parties know that you have 2 minutes to say your piece, and then you stop to listen while I have 2 minutes to say my piece. So I think if we set those ground rules, that person won't be talking for a whole 30 minutes and you're blue in the face.
Yes.
Wanting to interrupt them. So I think these rules probably will transfer as well and apply.
Yeah. April.
I think one major difference, though, between listening and learning about a person is that you're really, truly tapping in and listening to them because you have a responsibility to repeat back and show them that you heard them. And I think sometimes when we're in a conflict situation, in our head, we're too busy thinking about our rebuttal or what we want to say and our point to really listen to what that. I think it's a huge challenge for anyone. And so I think it's a difficult thing, but I think if you're right, if you just focus in on what that person is saying and trying to think about it, a lot of times it can help diffuse the situation.
Right.
It's a really hard thing to do.
It is. Yeah.
With a teenager knows it's really hard to do.
Yeah, and I would say, that's why I challenge all of us to do that. I'm going to leave you with this acronym, which is WAIT. And I'm the first to tell you I always have an opinion. That also doesn't mean I always have to share it. So WAIT means, why am I talking? So because you have an opinion doesn't always mean you need to share it. And sometimes if you actually listen to someone else, you might not need to share that feeling or opinion, or it might be nice to support someone else having that thought or opinion, right? Not judging it, and I will use Heng's guidance with my arguments with Dave in the future to give him 2 minutes to talk before I go on for another 15. But I do like that. Having shared expectations, right, and understanding might help clear the air, like April just said. And as wonderful speakers as you all are, active listening is actually a really great skill, and we should try to practice it. Go ahead.
may not be as easy. Speaking to someone below you may get too authoritative or authoritarian, depending on how we sort of see the world. However, the fact of the matter is, we have to practice in all ways, side by side, up and down. And it's interesting that although we're practicing in the microcosm of things, in the macrocosm, we're ignoring it entirely. And I think that's really the colors. It sets the tone to the music. It sets the pace. And somehow I think we just ignore it entirely. That's why this conversation can flow so easily, whether you're conflicted or not.
Right. So I think that's a really good point, and we talked a lot today about assumptions, right? And so how we come to the table and how open we are about having that conversation, because I can come to the table with all my guns ready to fire, and that is a very different way, not as open of a mind or a heart to hearing what somebody else has to say. And I think that you do point out some things that we all need to address in terms of power differentials that don't easily just go away because we sit on the same level even, right? So those are things I don't have an answer to immediately, but I think we have to look at and address and have those negotiations, discussions about how that works. And if we say we're truly equal in this partnership, how does that weigh out in decision making, finances, things of that nature? I think that's all very important. Yeah, so I'm going to take a few more quick minutes and then we'll take a break, and then you're going to have a great panel. We talked a lot about trust today, and you guys covered a lot of this, right? Be open, be honest, but be tactful. And we don't always have the same opinions. That doesn't mean that the minority opinion is not a good one, right? Maybe different, but different can also be very good. So have the open mind and open heart to hear that. Building trust for successful partnerships is about relationships with people. Right? It's not about talking to some cyborg or some computer. You may talk through the computer, but it's working with people. So genuinely, sincerely take the time to hear people and what they have to offer. Discuss openly prior negative and positive experiences, like the research experiences we talked about. Try to identify priorities for each partner and respective agencies, and identify clear goals. Relationships is the foundation for a successful partnership, and you really have to take some time to invest in that. We also talked about the importance of representing your community, and who do you represent, and who identifies that, and negotiating how that works. And as a partnership, is it Jackie who always goes because she's the coordinator, or is it important to have representation physically as well as in voice of all the community partners, and how does that work? And if Jackie carries the voice of all partners, how is that conveyed? Have discussions about that, right? These are some possible roles that we all have. These are things I've seen in all of you in the various workshops, and even today, advocating for your communities, whether that's university, academic, or a racial ethnic group, or an underserved community. Advocate for the use of the data, right? Research for knowledge's sake is a great thing, but really we're here to talk about research for social change. And how do we empower our communities by giving back the information that they've shared with us? And also identify appropriate venues to share the information. Because you've never authored a manuscript before does not mean that you cannot. And there are elegant writers in the room who may not have a PhD, but are a crux in the project. And so they also have a voice in disseminating. And you know, it's easy to kind of be polite and say, well, no, it's the academic faculty, they should be on there. But if you're a community organization that has resources and needs, and you're not publishing, but other people are publishing about you, where do you think future resources may go? Just something to consider, right? And if you're an equal partner at that table, that's something to consider as well. And it's also a great opportunity if you don't have the writing experience for faculty to share that. And it's a skill that we all have in some form, we just haven't practiced it. Inside your packet under additional tabs are some suggested protocols in terms of establishing structure. I know folks, like, immediately off the bat after Barnga said, I want rules and I want them to be clear and I want some order. So this is how you would go about doing that, right? Setting up some sort of leadership and management structure, expectations even about who's going to set the agenda. Do we just assume it's going to be the person who does it all the time, or is it something that everybody participates in establishing because the time we share together is important? Hang highlighted, is emails the only way we communicate? Do we vote by email, and is it the same as if we vote when we're all present? Those are all important things. Decision making, conflict resolution, even participation guidelines. I didn't stick that in there, but you can look online. Does it mean to be an active participant by coming once a year when we meet monthly and I only show up once? When I show up, what are expectations, right? Attendance, voting power, representation power. If I'm not there and Harold's coming in my place, does he have the power to vote on behalf of our agency? And if he goes in my place, have I informed him enough to empower him to make that decision, right? That's a lot of work. Again, different types of boards, executive boards, steering committees, advisory boards, could be a mix of community and academic, could be students, could be the people you're serving. 501c3s, and FQHCs, have to have a diversity of board members, right? And for a lot of our community clinics, the communities they serve actually need to have a seat on the board. That's empowering in some ways, but also ensuring that in that seat, they know what their roles and responsibilities are so they can contribute meaningfully, right? We talked a lot about that. conflict resolution. Folks said talking is key. Listening is also key. We also shared that there are groups that do conflict resolution. And sometimes it doesn't require bringing in this big organization, but maybe a colleague at an organization that has a neutral space but could help facilitate the dialogue. And so under your, I think, neon green tab are some resources that'll share with you conflicts of interest, right? Having that established up front. Because folks have conflicts don't mean they can't participate, but maybe being transparent about what those are is important. Participation expectations, like we said, whether it's face-to-face, attendance, the frequency of participation. We also shared a data and dissemination policy in there. So if you're collecting data and you're doing research, is it automatically owned by the university? And if it's not, what are the processes or procedures by which others can access your information? For our project, you got to go through the partnership and get permission, whether you're a master's level student, a PhD, or a faculty. Right? We talked about sharing co-authorship, right? So we have policies around that as well. So we gave you some templates. And then we're part of the ICTS here at UCI, and they have guidelines for partnerships. So that's actually a nice little checklist for both community and academic partners for things to consider, for things that you should consider talking about, the budgets, the roles, you guys said it. How do we define who the coordinator is? Is it an automatic assignment, or do we Rochambeau, or how do we decide who's the appropriate person? Is it the assets that they bring to the table? But those are actual practical tools that you can use as a guideline for building future projects and relationships. And then we don't have time for a group exercise, but we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then when you come back, we're going to have a wonderful panel of community-based participatory partners here in Orange County to speak with you. Okay, thanks everyone.
Hi, my name is John Bilomek. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Medicine here at UCI. I mostly do research in diabetes care and trying to improve diabetes care for underserved populations. I've been involved in a community partnership with St. Jude's Neighborhood Health Center, working on doing a long-term evaluation of an ongoing pediatric obesity prevention program they've been having going on, and I've learned a great deal from the experience.
Hi, my name is Elliot Quay. I'm an assistant professor in biomedical engineering here at UC Irvine, and my research is in the use of microtechnology for point-of-care diagnostics. So we've been interested in seeing if new technology actually has an impact in the clinic. We've partnered with Marianne Huntsman in SOS, which is a local clinic serving a lower-income, underserved population, trying to see if pain-free devices for self-monitoring of blood glucose will have a positive impact on patient compliance in testing themselves. If when they prick themselves, it hurts less. We were interested in seeing if the new technology actually ever helps, I guess, at the clinical level. So we wanted to do a study based on bringing new technology into a clinic. And there was actually a person in my lab that was also volunteering at SOS at the time, and that's how the partnership was formed. But we came up with an idea to see, to monitor blood glucose testing. So people are supposed to go home with blood prick kit, or prick the needle, prick the finger every day or 3 times a day, and there's a glucose monitoring kit. And the problem that is being faced with these systems is people don't prick themselves because it hurts. And especially in the SOS population, there is particularly low compliance. Recently, kits have gotten more advanced that the glucose sensors need much less blood now because the sensitivity is higher. And so we've been able to come out with lancing systems that are more or less pain-free because they take much less blood, the needles are smaller. So we wanted to see if we incorporated that into the patient population, the diabetic population, if we could improve rates of compliance
And then we wanted to compare that with just bribing people. So if we gave them $50 at the end of the month if they complete a certain percentage. So that's sort of the basis of the study. And yeah.
And I think, well, probably incentivize them is what we're going to do. But it's through bribes. But anyway, so I'm Marianne Henson, and I'm the Director of Clinical Pharmacy Services at Sheriff's House. And our clinic, and myself in particular, is very passionate about improving healthcare through the AAA, which is increasing patient experience, improving the patient experience, maintaining or decreasing costs, and improving health outcomes. And so, and I'm also a diabetic educator, so when this was proposed, it really meets two of those really important aims, and that's increasing the patient experience because it hopefully decrease pain and increase our compliance with blood glucose monitoring, and hopefully increase health outcomes. Because with that information, we can change their medications, we can help them, have some different goals in mind that would help improve their diabetic care, the end outcomes. So it sounded really interesting. And like I said, there was a middle person that was involved in this. So in fact, many of the middle people in this are no longer with us in a very good way. But it's been interesting, and we're just beginning.
Good morning. I'm Marian Ryan, and I am Executive Director of Research and Development for the Institute for Healthcare Advancement, and that's in La Habra, which is the northernmost part of Orange County. And it provides management support services for also a community health clinic called Friends of Family, which has about a population of 7,000 predominantly low-income Latino patients. I enjoyed a very successful career for about 20 years and had an opportunity to go back and get my PhD. So I just am a new PhD and 2 years ago, and I returned to this position at IHA. And a lot of my role there is to help them use data more efficiently. Friends of Family was a very early adopter of the electronic medical record, and so they had access to lots of data. But as many of you may know who work in community health clinics, the electronic health record really just replaced paper of an individual record. But it really didn't move us forward to doing population health, which is certainly everyone's goal in terms of improving the health of an entire patient population. So although guidelines have been released by the California Medical Association in concert with the California Association of Health Plans for the treatment, diagnosis and treatment of pediatric obesity, we found that many of our providers weren't necessarily following those guidelines. A survey of our patients in 2010 found that we had a very, very high rate of overweight and obesity, much higher than the county average, which was about a third. We were running about 50% plus. And so I had attended one of these workshops with ICTS and learned about the academic partnerships. And so I was the one who actually put out an email to Dr. Montoya seeking an academic partner, because I didn't know how the process worked. So I said, we have this problem. We really wanted to look, Friends of Family had gone to an electronic health record July of 2008. So we wanted to look at the weight trajectories over a 30-month period of time and their biometric profiles, because we had an EHR, whether they had pre-metabolic testing, what their lipids look like, their A1Cs, in order to provide data that might seed a pilot intervention project. And Dr. Montoya introduced me to Dr. Stan Basson, which was a privilege. He's involved in the Department of Preventive Cardiology, and that began our partnership. So we actually analyzed the data, and we're actually working on a paper. The outcome of the project was that we did initiate a pilot right now that's ongoing with 17 children and parents, trying to do a family-based multi-component intervention to address the issue of pediatric overweight and obesity. Because what our findings basically found was, and what we wanted to look at was, what happens to these children over time in a usual community health clinic setting without specific intervention. And what happens is that they don't get better. So it was less than a quarter of our children over a 30-month period of time actually improved their weight classification through usual care. So we've extended the data through 2011 now, and we are working on a paper to get the information out. And we do hope that it would provide an opportunity, at least, to get additional funding to provide a more expanded multi-component intervention program that would be community-based. Right now, we're looking at partnering with La Habra Boys and Girls Club and a private gym in the city of La Habra that's donating their certified trainers and karate instructors to the program. Dr. Bassett?
I practice active listening. So, you heard Marion, and I didn't have to say very much. I just have to keep her focused on the right track. Glad we had this opportunity to work together. She found me, as I guess the old saying is, I married up because I learned a lot from her. And I just contributed some guidance as to the direction, some ideas as to what you could pursue and what you could do. What Jackie said earlier about equal partnerships, I've come, and this lady over here talked about high-low and low-high communication. My experience has been changed over periods of the last 2 decades or so. So that tells you how long I've been in the field. So when I work with community agency or other groups, I consider equal partners. So once you develop this relationship, when we came in, she shared they're coming to get me. She shared what she could do well, and I shared what I could do well, and we were able to work out working conditions. And so I looked at this very favorably, that I could provide some guidance to an underserved population group that she was truly motivated to engage in. And I guess that was just my contribution to it. We working together on data analysis and other ideas. And one of the interesting ideas that came out, because my areas have changed a little bit, or have expanded, was the notion of obesity being the core of many of our problems. As you're reading today about the weight of the nation, and this major conference occurring in Washington, D.C. And in our case, I was at the time now, I'm looking at asthma and obesity. Why is it that asthma, children have this comorbidity, asthma and obesity? I mean, there's a number of different reasons, and you think, you speculate about it. But, so this was a great opportunity to work with the clinic because they had an impact population of Hispanics who are underserved, predominantly Hispanic underserved, and they were obese kids. So looking at those kinds of changes, could a nurse practitioner or doctor also provide care at the same time? Care meaning information, behavioral change to the parent and the child. The child is an asthmatic or asthmatic. So that was a novel that was interesting to look at. So Marion did a great job, and I'm pleased to work with her.
John, did you share how it was that you appeared in this issue?
Yeah, no, I didn't yet. So basically, this was through the community engagement unit at UCI at one of the events. I was introduced to Barry Ross, who's a vice president in the St. Joseph system, and under which the St. Jude's Neighborhood Health Center is involved. And he's had this sort of burning question about, again, how these programs that they've put into place, do they carry any sort of lasting benefit over years rather than just the months that the program is going on? But, so that was kind of sort of his real question. But as we talked about it, we figured out that the question you have to answer before you can get to the real question is, do we even have data that can help us see this? Does our organization even have the capacity to try to answer this question? And so we went together. We got together and applied for a campus community research incubator grant. I think it should be called the Community Campus Research Incubator. We always argue about this, but it's CCR. And sort of the purpose of the grant was to do a little pilot study. And the first aim of it was to see, can we demonstrate lasting changes in body composition that involved in this program. But the second question, the secondary question in quotes, which is really the first question that has to be answered, is to what degree do we have satisfactory follow-up data on these patients? And they do have an electronic health record as well. Electronic health records are designed for clinical application. It's still a relatively young technology that doesn't always give you data that's well set up to answer research questions. And we just completed data cloud. I literally had a package FedEx to me last Thursday with the last bunch of de-identified data to begin looking at, and we're really going to see now, what proportion of the participants in that program do we have this follow-up data for? And we're learning a lot about who within the organization can even extract this information. What kind of changes to the EHR maybe need to be made if they want to be able to look at these kind of questions more systematically. And we're finding that's the most interesting stuff to look at. And then, but by the way, we actually might be able to see, is this program having a lasting effect or not, and are there additional resources that maybe need to be devoted to it?
So Dr. Billnick shared that they did get some funding support from the ICTS and the CCRI computer grants. Dr. Basson and Dr. Rudd, did you as well? Yes. Okay. And then
And we did as well.
Okay. So funding did matter in this case. However, a lot of these partnerships started without any resources, and together they partnered to seek out funding opportunities. And then there are various stages in the project. In Dr. Ryan's case, they're going to be looking at more data. And then in Dr. Billnick's scenario, I think that the data they find will then provide them an opportunity to springboard into larger grants for St. Jude. So there are lots of great opportunities. I like that Dr. Basson said he married up. Was it a perfect match in heaven, though? I mean, you share some of the great successes, but we're also here to learn about what maybe some of the things we
It was actually, I have to share that I'm unusually situated in a community health clinic because I did just recently earn my advanced degree, and I am very interested after spending a career in the trenches trying to make life better for populations of people. I took that change in my career because I wanted to start answering some of the questions more scientifically that I had struggled to fix while I was in the trenches doing the work. However, I think I'm uniquely situated that way in a community health clinic. But I have to say that my first meeting with Dr. Bassett, I was extremely intimidated because he's very well published, and I'm new, relatively new to certainly the research world. But he was extremely gracious. And I think what worked well was the flexibility. Oftentimes, because both of us have other schedules, this grant was really, as he commented, my SAS output was always, 2 a.m. or 1 a.m. So it wasn't being produced during my work day. It was after hours work. So we were both trying to fit this into very busy schedules, and I appreciated his flexibility in being able to reschedule a meeting. Oftentimes coming down the freeway from La Habra, I'd get stuck at that 57 going south where the 91 hits a cement wall, and so I'd be, oh my God, I don't want him waiting, and I'd call the operator, and they were very good about letting me know that I was going to be running late. So I really appreciated that degree of flexibility. But we had several meetings, and I learned to copy my statistical output. It made it easier for Dr. Basson when I arrived. He didn't have to go find an email and figure out where we were in the project. So I I made copies for him. A couple of meetings I brought my academic intern, so I did have an academic intern on the project, which was really key because, again, I had a million other jobs to be doing during my regular workday. And she attended the meetings and found them to be extremely valuable, and that's just an excellent learning opportunity for, as we grow the next professionals of tomorrow, which I think is everyone's responsibility. So I think the challenges, if I were to say what maybe some of the barriers might have been, would be because I had access to statistical software and to my own resources. I'm a visiting scholar with my university with Brandeis on the East Coast, so I have access to the Boston Consortium of Libraries. I was interested to know for other community partners, how do they tap into the resources that UCI has in terms of how would I have gotten statistical help if that's what I needed, and how would I have accessed the rich medical library at UCI. So again, in my situation, I didn't need them, but that might be a concern of other community partners that would need to be addressed. But other than that, I thought that the relationship went very well. I was very pleased.
What happens at UCI stays at UCI. So I think one of the major barriers that we have here, and this is a systemic barrier here, is statistical consulting for community agencies. And that's been really good. One way or another needs to be addressed if we're going to go beyond the report stage. So reports are great. If you like to share, as Jackie talked about earlier, how do you share it? And one method of sharing are these kinds of mini conferences that you've got other nuggets, ideas, and presentation. A second is some kind of something to consider a local Orange County, not the Stone Gazette that I can't remember who puts it out, but puts it out? Yes, and not through that, but some kind of publication of these findings that occurred so that you can improve your practices, which is ultimately the outcome. And that's what is important that Marianne and I worked out. She was really heavily motivated to improve the practice at her clinic. So could we use this data that's there to analyze it to first improve the practice at her clinic, which is ultimately the mission of this group. And the second is then now we can disseminate this, if that helps, then we can disseminate that out to the rest of the community. So I think that's something you have to look into your mission. That's what we asked before when we first started. What was the mission of her clinic? I didn't know anything about her clinic. What was the mission of her clinic? And what was her objective? So I had my own objectives, but I needed to fit mine with her objectives. So if they were compatible, date for a while, see if they're compatible, and we could date, as you know, we take the next step. So it was easy because she was in the same neighborhood. She had a degree, and she could do some statistical stuff that I suggested. And we worked out together. If it was a good idea, she submitted a good idea. We could work that out together. But if you don't have that benefit, it creates a burden which needs to be addressed in some way or fashion through the university. And that's a systemic issue that needs to be, if this group can take the next step beyond what we have started here. So I think that's a huge barrier that I know the university thrives on and gets its recognition, as Marianne said, about papers being published. So that's an objective of the university. And the objective of your clinics that you represent are to improve your practices. And how can you connect, intertwine with each other and get both these things done? They don't have to be uniquely different. They can work together in a collaborative relationship. So that's really important. Very exciting.
And we did do that. So all the output was shared back with primary care providers, and actually about 4 months into the project, new clinical practice guidelines were released by our chief pediatrician at the clinic, because we found that in my data analysis, only 1/3 of the patient population had had any premetabolic testing, and yet by guidelines, 100% of the children should have had premetabolic testing.
Dr. Hudson, can you share maybe some of the challenges and partnership? So you have a lot of middle people to help broker your partnership.
Well, when I say middle people, there was about 5 of us that were involved in this in the very beginning, and it's been a time-consuming effort, or I shouldn't say time-consuming. It's been long and drawn out, and in that period of time, staffing at our clinic has changed, and so I'm pretty much the only one left there that was from the original group. It's the 2 of us, and I told him, if you dare leave this grant, I will kill you. I've affectionately called this grant Last Man Standing. And they've all moved on to great things. So I think that probably one of the barriers that we found is just it's a laborious process, and the IRB for us, because it was one of the first times we've done this, requires a lot, and it requires time and everything. I think we've worked well together. I think we just understand that, we're upfront about requests and offers of what we can do and what someone else can do. I think we're respectful of each other's expertise, and so I think it's a good relationship. But we're not very far. We still haven't started. So we'll see.
I do have a question. You just touched on her, and that is that, there's been a lot of shift. I've also found myself in a situation where county and government agencies have done things with subcontractors, which have now, well, let's just say this way, the contracts are expired, they're phasing out. And so my problem with the IRB process is that how do I follow up with entities that no longer are even in this county? I see a big difficulty getting requested
stakeholder, a key person that's going to be your champion, and you have to really identify that. And that may shift and it may change, but you really have to go in and figure out who's your champion, who's your driver, and identify them and keep in touch with them. Because, you know, our medical director left, and that was a key champion. But however, he left, and he certainly passed on effectively where we were going, and you know, made sure that he had you know, left a trail that could be followed and that didn't skip a beat, miss a beat. So
Was access to electronic data better in retrospect, since you didn't have to think about electronic?
we have electronic health records and have had them for some time, but we're not, for the data that we're going to get, it's a different software that we're going to use to capture our data. So we won't even be in the electronic health record, really.
But it is an online source, maybe, that they can go in and do their surveys anonymously.
Well, what's going to happen is they have their glucose meters at home, and it stores all their readings, and at the end it just gets downloaded after the clinic.
But it's not going to be a written survey in any way, shape, or form.
There's no-
Doing some sort of data, so just the physical data.
Right. We don't have any surveys involved in our research.
Got it.
Okay.
You know, one thing we found.
Digital bits, got it.
Right.
One thing I found in working with the EHR, with my partner, is that there really wasn't a dedicated person that was skilled in running queries on the data and to be able to extract data from the record. So the ultimate solution, and also there's sort of some kind of organizational and procedural barriers to having an outside person come in, right? Because they're looking at sensitive patient data, and there was some funding, but with limits to it. So at the end of the day, you know, it was staff members doing. I mean, it felt so backwards, but just basically doing chart reviews just like you would have done back in the paper chart days, extracting key points of data that we're now using. And so one lesson from this project is to improve the capacity of the organization to do this kind of research is we need to get to a point that they can extract queryable data at any of the sites, including this neighborhood center.
So Dr. Huntsman had pointed out a really important part, which is transition. And all of you know that happens very regularly. We talked about change being daily, and we all chuckled a little bit. And that's a reality. And so I think in any work that we do, program champions are very important. And I think that there needs to be reciprocity in both sides. So I'm going to use Dr. Huntsman as an example. Even though there's all this transition, having a program champion who passed on information was important. And I think as an academic supporter, Dr. Clay, being able to give information to say it's moving forward. So it's not just, oh yeah, it's a great project and it's happening, but really supporting and saying this is where we're going with this is the potential that's going to come out of the data. And I think on the academic side, having the community partners saying, yes, this has value to what we're doing, and being able to support each other is actually also very important in the success of the project. And in Dr. Billimak's case, I don't know who he worked with specifically, but Barry Ross is one of the biggest program champions you can have, but the type of leadership that he provides within St. Jude also has a big impact on whether or not the project has been successful, just as everybody else here at the table. So I think it's not putting the onus just on one person. We talked a lot about, well, who's going to be that coordinator? You know, and if that person leaves, what happens, right? But it is an investment, and there is reciprocity in terms of the success of the project and its movement forward. And Dr. Huntsman was honest. It's taken a long time. And maybe it took 18 months to get there, but then in the next 6 months, the results that you yield are going to be so worthwhile that that investment is worth it. So it's having those conversations. We talked about maybe it takes 10 hours for that first survey, but then you get the 50 that you need in the next weekend. And so it's not always as simple as that work plan we all started out with, but to be able to negotiate and have some flexibility with that is also really important. So, can you guys share any recommendations for developing collaborative partnerships? Secret tips you might.
Well, I had a couple of tips. It's a little bit following up on some of the challenges that we faced as well. But one of the biggest difficulties that we've had in terms of why it's taken so long for the project to get started is the IRB approval process. Because we're doing a clinical study and doing some research on this, the institution moving forward. And I, being an engineer, had never done this before. actually neither of us had really gone through that detailed official IRB process. And so I think that I've learned that there's actually a lot of resources here on campus at UCI that are helpful. And so one of the things that we hit on early was that, like Dr. Baskin mentioned, the statistical analysis was really important for the design of the study to be approved. And so in the ICTS, we found that there are statistical resources available for a small fee for people that are trained in analysis, design and analysis of clinical trials, for example. So that was really helpful for us. Another thing was in the IRB process, you're supposed to fill out all these forms, and then by the time you apply, when you're actually putting your name in, they tell you which training you're supposed to take. And so I filled out all the forms, and at the end I started taking the training, and I realized that it would have been good to take the training first, but I just didn't know that which trainings were available until you actually tried to submit it. So I guess if you start by trying to submit just something blank, it'll tell you what you need to train on. There's these web classes you take. And it just explains kind of the history of where IRBs came from and what people are concerned about. And so then, that actually, after I took the training, I rewrote all of the documents because I realized we could do things backwards. And the other thing I found was that we tried to screen our drafts with a number of different people on campus, but what I found was people generally just gave us positive feedback. They said, this looks good, this looks good. But in the end, when we finally submitted it, we got huge amounts of negative feedback. Right? We missed this and this and this. And so I think, in retrospect, I would have skipped all of the screening through kind of volunteers and just submit whatever you have as early as you can, because that's, once we started hearing back from the IRB, then we could talk to them on the phone and we could work out the details of what was missing there. And I think that a lot of those issues, there was no way that we could have anticipated them until we got to that point where it was actually get against those programs. So that's what I would say.
So there's skills building on both sides of the coin as well, which I think is great. And then as we talked about, the first thing this morning was the wealth of resources that are here on campus as well. Fullerton is also a university partner, and there are also a wealth of resources there. I know it's hard sometimes to physically get here, but a lot of that information can be provided to you so that you know who to reach out to when you have those conversations with. Anyone else want to share recommendations for?
Just a recommendation that I had that I think I've already put forward to ARDA is that because we were struggling in that our clinic is going to has just applied in the next round of the CCRI grant applications to do an expanded version of our pilot. And I was challenged to find again an academic partner to move us from the more analytical descriptive data to actual intervention. We want to use multi-component intervention with some rich behavioral measurements. So looking for more of a behavioralist probably in terms of an academic partner, and being able to have those resources without just going on UCI's campus. Of course, you can go and look at everyone's professor's profile, but number one, it takes a lot of time and it may not be the most efficient or the most beneficial for our community partners. So if ICTS had some type of way to help link community organizations with professors that are interested in building these community partnerships and disclose not just their area of research, but maybe what they might be looking for from a community partner, such as a particular patient population or a particular area of interest, that these bridges might be able to be facilitated more efficiently. And than us trying to look and find somebody who's most suitable for carrying our work forward. So.
And you all are like segueing perfectly. The faculty mentor opportunity through the training workshops is actually what we're hoping to do. Dr. Belinek is one of those faculty mentors. We have 4 or 5 faculty over at Cal State Fullerton, and we're looking to bridge that opportunity to see if the interests from both sides really match and the expertise can come together to work on projects. And I know these are clinics that we're talking about, and St. Jude also has a community clinic, but I think the core of it is that a lot of your organizations have data. lots and lots of data. And so you don't have to have an electronic health record. If you do, it's great. Obviously, they can work with it. But if you have data that you want to mine and to find opportunities to enrich your programs, which is the mission of all of our work, these are perfect examples of the type of opportunities where we can partner with faculty. We don't all have to be using SAS, but there is the capacity to do so. But there's lots of different ways to look at your data and really tell folks, you're so busy in the streets doing the work that you forget to pat yourselves on the back, and other people need to know the great work that you're doing. And earlier, Dr. Baston has shared, we need a space where we can learn from each other, and we're so mired day to day in getting our jobs done that sometimes we don't get an opportunity to do that. So the Alliance is also developing our web portal to house a lot of those types of community reports and to provide a space, especially here in Orange County, where we can have that dialogue and share the resources and see the richness through the great work that's going on. Artists said it yesterday, there is some amazing stuff going on here, and it's the best kept secret in Orange County. And so we're hoping to facilitate both the partnering with faculty as well as the dissemination of information to help us advance our work as well. I want to open it up. This is a great group of people. They're faculty doing research, they're teaching, they're working in community sites. Are there any questions you might have?
Hi, I have a background in public health and urban planning, and you guys are all dealing with, diabetes and obesity that have, much broader causes and roots than just what can be addressed in the clinical setting. So I was wondering if any of your partnerships are, collaborating or partnering with planning departments or community organizations that look at it from a more community-based perspective, offering more chances for exercise and better nutrition, the broader scope of those diseases.
I can just speak that this part of what we are doing, not doing yet, but plan to do, is also, we addressed that in a grant that we had, the IHI, and that of what we were doing, and then how we hope to use that information to spread to a larger population. So although we're not there, we certainly identified it in a larger grant at a national level as something that we had very intentional about. So although, like I said, we haven't started, but we certainly identified it as important to spread.
And Friends and Family, not a part of this academic partnership, but they collaborated with the city of La Habra to bring a Kaboom playground to La Habra, which is within about a mile of our clinic site. So there is a very large and active La Habra city-wide collaborative made up of about 24 community organizations, and it was done through that collaborative.
There is an organization called NUPAC, familiar with NUPAC? And I think you'd find that on a larger scale you may be looking at opportunities. Environmental changes, Barry Ross is very interested in. And if you meetings actually this coming Thursday, and they have a lot of partnerships, networks, and so on. It's down at the Orange County Health Agency on 17th Street. In the back. There's a trailer in the back. It's at 1 o'clock for those interested. It's at 1 o'clock.
Questions?
Are all you frightened of IRBs? There's really silence here that was IRBs, the dragon. But it is a safety measure. On the other side, the preventive cardiology at UCI, it is a safety measure because not everyone should have access to health records or people's health records. You want your privacy. And this is their way of protecting, who might be identified, so on and so forth. This is a way of protecting your privacy. And it's going to become more and more scrutinized as Google and Microsoft and all these other groups that want to store your records in the clouds and this and that. And you have to be very, very careful for your clients, your patients, whoever you're with, about making sure that the privacy does take place. So even though it's not our best friend, the IRB, but they really do provide a significant service. And just, I guess, a tip would be don't expect funding or approval the first time you submit. You're going to get critical feedback, which will help you be taken in a constructive way. Now, I know your ego's in there because I've written over a year a lot. Your ego's there, you're shattered. Why didn't they see this? Blah, 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 blah. after all, you go have a scotch. A couple, my first beverage of choice is. So after that, then look at what they have to say about it. And some of it is nitpicking, it's correct, but the other things there is really critical as to how to clarify, how to express what you said in a better way. And so just understand, have a thick shell. It's going to take once or twice, maybe 3 or 4 times. I was in a slow group, it took me about half a dozen times to finally get the idea of what this is about and how to write this in a better way. So there are people, they're very fast, first time through, they hit the lottery. Well, good for them. That's not my case. So I think just understand that all of us had failures in making the proposal to go for the IRB. Look, they spend the time critically analyzing it. Is it safe? Is it effective? Is there a chance this is a useful thing? And they're giving you the feedback that you should have.
And I think just on that point, I think starting early, like Elliot mentioned, is really important. And I remember when I was doing my doctorate in my 20s, I thought, oh, what am I doing with my 20s, And someone said, well, listen, you're going to be 30 someday one way or another. You're going to be 35, you're going to be 55, you're going to be 75, hopefully. One way or another, but when you turn 30 or when you turn 40, where do you want to be? And it's with IRB, it's sort of like, listen, this could take a year to get approved. Well, a year is going to pass whether or not you start on IRB today or not. But in a year, do you want to be doing research? So kind of starting early, I think, it seems so discouraging. You think like, God, there's no chance they're going to take this proposal the first time I do it. But if you don't begin, you'll never get there. And one thing about IRB, and I don't know how much is a recent change or something I just recently learned of, but they've been offering workshops about how to prepare proposals. And I had done a number of IRBs, and I still attended this thing and realized, like, wow, no wonder I wasn't getting approved the first time. There's simple tips, and getting to know the people in the IRB can really help lower some of those barriers as well.
And okay, I have 2 separate questions. The first one is the IRB process. Is there any guideline instruction from the IRB to say that this kind of document, this kind of training you have to take in order for you to conduct this kind of research instead of submitting a blind application to them, and they're going to say, oh, really to do this, you have to do this first, you have to go on training. So if there's any guideline instruction from the IRB, hey, this kind of human subject, you have to take this kind of training in order for you to qualify to conduct this kind of research. And my second question is to Dr. John Bellman. It's about, I'm very interested about your research on the why the chronic disease still happen even though they still have a better access to health care. So one of the reasons might be some ethnic population, they experience multiple health issues. That way if you address only one health issue, it might not work in that setting. So it's very interesting also to learn about how to have those kind of patients with the limited English speaking to have a better communication with the doctor too. So those kind of research is very good to know the underlying causes or factors of why those people have a better access to healthcare with a specific population, but their health outcome is still not getting better.
Right. I could kind of take both questions. The first one was a very easy question. Yes. There are some guidelines on the UCI IRB's website, and I'm not intimately familiar with the links, but that might be something like our group can connect you to. But they do sort of talk through, although, as Elliot pointed out, sometimes you have to kind of go down the wrong road a little bit to find your way back to the right one, and that's a very common experience. But they at least discuss, there's only a handful of tutorials, and you probably won't have, if you're not doing animal research, you won't do the animal research tutorial. So, but you will do the human subjects research tutorial, you will do the HIPAA health information tutorial, but there's some worksheets on the website that help you determine, okay, what's the level of risk that's involved in the study, that helps determine what level of review is required. Is it a full committee review or an expedited review or an exempt protocol? And then also, a little bit about which tutorials you need to take. I wish I had a bunch of time to talk about my research, and we can talk more about it in general, but I think, yeah, the real challenge that comes with patients in underserved populations who even receive all the appropriate processes of care. They get paid for by CMS and are in all the guidelines. They get all the annual tests and eye exams and foot exams and all the things they're supposed to have done is exactly what you're talking about. Life is much more complex than just a series of biomarkers and physical signs and symptoms. And we're just looking at ways of even trying to help patients identify what these multiple issues are that are weighing on them. Is it comorbid illness? Is it caregiving responsibility? Is it living in an unsafe neighborhood that makes it difficult to exercise? And I try to look at sort of how can we help patients sort of get their own heads around sort of what is it that's making it tough for me, and then can I have a better dialogue about that with my doctor so maybe they can help simplify or tailor a treatment regimen that is more responsive to those particular challenges.
Have you also looked at the past experience they have faced? Let's say some population, they go through war and then past trauma, and then it's still being there after 20 years living in the United States. So I have like looking at the past history they have experienced, so also can determine what kind of care, what kind of research should be done properly to address those kind of issues.
Yeah, that's an extremely important issue. I think we often end up looking at it sort of what symptoms and experiences are they having today, which often, of course, are a consequence of a whole lifetime of development and exposure to stressors. Although we are doing some work with individuals that have suffered extreme trauma and are seeking care and have their mental health symptoms go untreated, that you and I could talk about a little bit as well. But that's a very important area.
So my name is Arda. I actually work at the ICTF in their community engagement unit, but only because I'm intimately familiar with each and every one of your projects. I'm just curious, how did you guys navigate the field when there was a difference of opinion on how to proceed and which way the project should be going, even though the end result was still the same of how you guys wanted to go there, but perhaps the academic partner said we should go this way, the community partner said we can't do that, let's go this way. How do you guys navigate when there's just a difference of opinion and how to move forward?
It's her project.
I defer to Dr.
No, seriously, it was her project, her data, her project. I'm there to help. So I think that depends on how.
But Dr. Bassett, in all honesty, he suggested several additional structured variables that if we could find them in the data, which I did.
But she could have rejected it. She said, "No, I don't want to do this." That's fine. That's her call. I think that was the interaction we had.
I think that's a fantastic interaction. But a lot of, no, it is. And a lot of partnerships that at least I'm privy to don't always have that, or it might be that sometimes some partnerships say, hey, I got the money, let's start. And people are like, no, we got to wait until we get all these approvals. It's just, if there is, so if you guys have not had any difficulties, I mean, if, let's say, somewhere down the line something happens and you guys don't agree, how would you navigate that field and that sensitive relationship?
Well, yeah, so I just didn't want to talk too much in a row, but we did have some difficulty a little bit. So basically, you know, Barry Ross is the really the champion of the project. He and I entered the partnership together. But the person this all sort of came down to was the nurse practitioner that actually runs the clinic-based program. And she's like Captain America plus Superman, you know, a little bit of military. She's just unbelievable. You're just like, I just want, we need 1 million of you, you know? And but because there's only one of her, she's pulled in many, many directions, and sometimes she wasn't getting the support necessary from the other people in the organization that could have been pulling these. So she ended up doing a lot of the data collection stuff, which to me never seemed like the way to go, you know, because she had enough to do. And but at the same time, I felt a little bit like you know, like Dr. Basson is just kind of wanted to let the organization find their way and didn't want to step on any toes. I didn't want to say like this isn't getting done fast enough because, you know, I don't want Captain America to get in trouble, you know. And so, so of course she wouldn't have. And so this was a very valuable learning experience to sort of figure out how to discuss some of these issues about holding each other accountable. And there's other things that I'm sure I held up in the process as well. And in your packet, there's actually this. This is why Art asked the question. So I talk about this, but there's this pink salmon-colored Community and Action Academic Partnership Guidelines and Suggested Checklist, which I was part of the Community Engagement Unit Committee that sort of helped develop some of these things. And it brings up a lot of the questions surrounding IRB and funding and division of labor and expectations and goals for the project, and how do you communicate about this stuff. And this will not solve every problem, but at least it sort of establishes going through this together once the project sort of is starting to take shape is a good idea, because I think it took me a little bit of, I had some uncertainty about how do I raise these issues about getting the results done fast enough, and I'm not sure that they would have, if there was something that I wasn't doing right, I don't even know if I would have heard about it, or I probably was doing things that they didn't like that maybe I never heard about because we didn't establish that. And this kind of helps at least plant the seed for that a little bit, and it might accelerate a little bit faster the development of that kind of frankness with each other, So give it a look, it might be useful.
Any other questions?
Ecological studies are looking based on historical data. Is that an easier IRB than those more active studies like
Yeah. So,
is it a simple IRB?
so oftentimes that will be a complex bit. Or no, exempt because it's existing data and you just
Think about that. Get signed off on. Do you need to have active permission from the participants back in the day? Some of them may be dead. And that's why there may be a problem. Well, it's true. I mean, I'm sorry, in my data collection, I found 5 dead. So at some point, you have to get permission from family members of the dead, or it's not personal data per se, it's just seeing if there's a positive effect because of what I family did with their things. And now looking back, I want to look at that. But there is a problem. I can't get a permission or a signed off okay from every single member in the study.
For review to become exempt, so exempt sort of sounds like you're exempt from us looking at it, but there is still a looking at it that occurs. And so if you communicate with the IRB about the situation, but in general, if the data is de-identified, so if you're not saying like, what did Bill Smith think of smoking? Yeah, like but if it's more looking in the aggregate at de-identified data, you can still look at all kinds of correlations and advanced modeling on the data, but as long as you can't link it back to a person, that becomes much easier to obtain that exempt status, which means an exempt means you don't need to acquire consent.
So qualitative additives, this would be absolutely not what I want to do. I don't want to get this done in the next 15 years.
Yeah, at any point you're collecting, if you obtain consent from those individuals that you're doing the qualitative data collection, then that's fine. But you can certainly start with the de-identified
We want to
data.
make a quant study, but then the question really begs it, if we want to do a qualitative, which might be more meaningful for the next project.
Yeah, so if you're involving, if you're collecting new data that wasn't collected for any reason other than the research, and if you're dealing with identifiable data, especially health-related data, you'll have to go through the IRB. But there's lots of projects that don't require those steps that you could have an exempt protocol that doesn't. It's very easy to get started. I mean, relatively easy to get started.
I know that, after several times that we were in this workshop, we kind of got to know each other, and we learned like a little bit about, what we do. But it's probably also a beginning of a partnership too. So to me, it would have been a nice start if some people have ideas that they are looking for, partnership. So when we are, I know we have a list that we can, like if you want to share your contact, information. But at the same time, if there are things that you are looking for, and maybe between us there are some of us that are interested, but they never knew how to reach out, and then the information has not been shared. Maybe it would be a good idea to have that connection. I don't know how, but I'm just opening a idea that maybe some of us can have those ideas, getting us together a little bit closer, and have better community, organization, perhaps in the future.
So aside from sharing participant information, you guys are all prompting me today. Your evaluation today actually does prompt you to start putting down some of those thoughts and ideas. And I was hoping to bring that back to the group in terms of letting folks know about potential partnerships. And they're not just academic community, they're community partnerships as well that could be fostered. So I'm expecting, since you brought it up, there will be some great ideas be shared, and that's also why we've been prompting you to start considering. It doesn't have to be the next project of the century. It could be assessing your own current data, like Dr. Baskin said, and saying, hey, are we being effective? And like Dr. Billimek said, yeah, that's the primary question, but what do we need to do in terms of looking at things to show the impact of our work? We'll discuss how to share some of that first, but I'm definitely requesting that so we can start circulating that information. So thank you. Any other thoughts, comments, or distinguished panel? Any last words on our panelists?
Thank you.
Thank you too.
Yeah. So, okay, the goal, I am impressed, the goal was to spell teams, right? And you guys spelled teammates, so I'm very impressed that is a longer word. And you guys are so intellectual rule followers, which are the longest possible word. The longest possible word, not necessarily having to use every single letter that you were provided. But we wanted to end on that note because teams are people with diverse backgrounds that bring individual talents and resources. Teams are diverse groups that can provide a greater variety of solutions, like all of you did, you think. Teams are groups that are more likely to have positive outcomes in the workplace. And diverse teams can be more productive and creative. I think you all buy into that and you're aware of that. But we walked through a lot of exercises today to do a little bit of self-reflection on communication and how key that is to building successful partnerships. And I like the team that broke out on their own for a little bit. We're like, we're vested in this. And then even when you spell teammates, not everyone was bought in, right? They're just going, I'm not a part of that. I don't know what you're doing, but I'm not a part of that. But really, it was just to bring us full circle, give you an opportunity to talk, which took away from you all day to day. But to remind you, as the last comment during the panel was, it's not just about community academic partnerships, but building relationships with others in the room. And it really is about the people that you work with. And so communicating, not only in using your spoken word, but being an active listener, waiting, right? It's also just as important. And then helping you set some guidelines and understanding is really important to the communication process and to building a richer relationship. So steps on successful partnerships: establish good communication early, find committed partners, outline common goals, roles, and rules of engagement, make financial agreements clear, recognize that you will not always agree and be willing to talk and resolve the differences in time. And really, time can't be measured in a bottle. Every partnership is not built on the same amount of time. Some have to deliver a handshake and become lifetime partnerships. Some take years to build. So we don't have all of those key answers, but it really is the investment in the process. I also wanted to share, so real quickly, that was our outline that we started with, and I hope that after today we can answer some of these questions and that we've shared resources for you to help build more successful partnerships. And then if you didn't have the opportunity to attend the first 2 workshops, and if you did, they are actually now available online to you. The slides as well as the voice of your presenters are online at these links, and so we hope that you will also utilize that as a resource and share that with others that you work with and engage with. And then this session will also be available in a few weeks, and when that is, I will make sure that you know that. Other than that, I really want to thank you for your time today. I've really enjoyed having the opportunity to speak with all of you. I want to go ahead and recognize our funder, which is the National Institute National Center for Research Resources, and really to thank all of you for engaging in all the activities, even the ones that didn't feel so fun. The smiles all day have been very warm and welcoming to me, and that's been a great experience for me to receive that from all of you today. So I want to thank you for that.
Yeah, will the following 2 workshops be available online eventually as well?
Yes, so the entire series will be available online, and as they come out, we'll send out the list. We also will have a second series of workshops that will start this fall, and we're securing both dates and locations, so if you know others who are interested in one of the 5 or in all 5, we also would encourage you to share that information to make sure as participants you all receive that. But the last question again that was brought up during the panel is really helping to foster these relationships, and that is what I'm here to do. There's no silly question, there's no silly idea, and there are resources that may be not grant funded that could help strengthen the work that you're doing with your organization. So we really encourage you to share that information, to help vocalize that either verbally or written, so that we can help broker some of those relationships and partnerships. And I hope you had different networking today, not the usual, But we also will send out the participant list so that you can also follow up with one another if you didn't have as much time as you'd like to participate today. So thank you very much. And then our next workshop is a month from now at the Delhi Community Center and focuses on program evaluation. Thank you, everyone. Have a